Hello, people at home. If you haven't done so already, if you could let me know in the chat that you're here. Make sure you're keeping the stuff that you're typing into the chat professional. Just take attendance quick here. So you guys are in the last, what do we call this, sprint to the finish, I guess? 7 days you have left of this course. So if you're wondering what the 3 days are in the exam period at the end, or whatever you want to call that last 3 days, that's like November 11, 12, 13. So those 3 days they're basically catch-up days. We were told not to present any new material, so we're not going to do anything new during those days. We were told not to have a summative activity. So they don't want us to have a big new summative assignment. So, and this is probably good for a lot of people in here. We're going to use that as an opportunity to catch up. So some people are probably going to have assignments and stuff that they need to finish. I do have to get all of that stuff from you. So this is kind of like a weird situation where normally we get to the end of the semester, if you're missing an assignment, it's like, all right, well, I can probably figure out from what I've got here, like how much you understand and like what you know about the course. But because of the way that this works, and there are so few evaluations already because of the timeline is so compressed, I really don't have enough from you unless you hand everything in. So I have to track down every single assignment from every person. So for some people, that's going to be a real issue because some people are not being super great about getting all of their assignments in. So I think that those 3 days are probably going to be good for a lot of people that need to finish stuff up so that they can get their credit. Question?
What's gonna happen if we don't have anything to catch up on? We just stay on that period?
You just chill on those days. I'll be available. I'll be here. I'll be here on like the stream, like for questions and to support people that are working on stuff. But if you really are done everything in the course and there's nothing you want to resubmit or anything like that, you just chill. Then you're done. You're done. Congratulations. You got the credit. Yes.
So we're not going to do unit 5?
No, we are.
We are.
Yep.
Oh.
So like I said, tomorrow we're going to do animal systems. This is our last day of animal systems. Then we've got 2 days of plants and 2 days of microbiology. Is that how much I would like to allocate to those days? No. I lost 5 days at the beginning of this unit for this course because of odd planning that happened. And that's a month of regular time, right? So, so I can't do much about that. So I lost days that I wanted to include in those units. So there's really nothing I can do about it. So those are going to have to be a little bit abbreviated, and there's really no way around that. I did extend the animal systems one a little bit, mostly because in general, I think that's the one that's the most relevant to people. People care about human animal systems more than any of these other things. Most of the people that take this course, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of people that take this course are interested in nursing or some other type of human health related. Not everybody, but a lot of people are interested in that aspect of biology. And so this is probably the most relevant for a lot of people. Not everyone. Some people are super into plants and stuff. Apologies if botany is your big thing, because it got a little bit of short shrift in this course. But anyway, so everybody should take attendance quick here. So I just want to mention, yeah, we got 7 days left, guys. That's what it is. So there's one more day of this animal system stuff. I'm counting today, by the way, in the 7. Then we've got 2 days of plants and 2 days of microbiology, and then we are done. For plants and microbiology, we will have a short quiz at the end of those 2 days, but again, it's open book, okay? It will be short because it's only 2 days of content. It'll probably be something like a 15-mark multiple choice quiz or something like that. It's gonna be brief, okay? I'm not gonna nail you with some giant test after 2 days of content. And we will have a short summative assignment of some kind, but that will be the only thing from them. Plus the vocabulary list. I will shrink the number of words for the vocabulary list though, because obviously we're going to be covering less things in each of those. So that's just this kind of thing that as long as you're filling in the vocabulary list as you go, like there's really not that much to it. You got 10 words from the unit in there, you've written the definitions in your own words. That's like a freebie, right? That's an easy thing to do. Was that a question?
Yes.
What's that?
Is it gonna affect us since we took something this year is it gonna affect us next year if we take biology?
There is no next year of this biology course. There isn't. This is technically grade 11 college bio, but there is no grade 12 college bio. Like, it doesn't exist. So no, it will not affect you. If you wanted to take 3U bio, that's grade 11 university bio, there's a little bit of overlap with this course, but not a ton. You could do that. But if you wanted to take grade 12 university bio, which is the only grade 12 course, you would have to take grade 11 university bio first. So no matter what, you'd have to take the other grade 11 course. And absolutely, there's nothing you'd be missing out from this at all. So now I would say if you're going to take 3U bio, this course does set you up well. We talked about meiosis, we talked about basic genetics and stuff like that. All of that stuff is in 3U bio in a lot more detail. But the stuff that is in 3U bio from this course is probably the most difficult stuff from that course as well. There is overlap. So this is actually probably a good preparatory course for grade 11 university bio if people are interested. No pressure there whatsoever, but just saying. Okay, let me take attendance real quick. I keep forgetting to do this. Is that everybody from at home? If you haven't let me know you're here yet. I have a feeling some people haven't because I'm not getting a lot of people. It's good to see you all again, by the way. It's nice to see you. It's been a long road. How are your other courses going? Okay. It's been weird this semester, eh? This quadrimester. It's been something. Are you at home? No. Fuck. Tab, gotcha. Nope. Erica. Jeez. Nick, are you at home? Don't see ya. Jonah. Carter. No. Okay. Thanks. Ali, I'm assuming, yeah, never mind. That's Mohammed, right? I knew that. Mohammed Ali Khan, right? No. Jaden, yes. Micah, you there? No. And Tony. Tony, you should use your school account when you're logging on here, just so you know. Okay. So let's talk about what we're going to do today. So one thing to mention, a number of people have submitted assignments that were owed to me over the break. Fantastic. I haven't had a chance to mark a lot of them because I was busy marking stuff from my other course, but that's not to say that I won't be marking them shortly. So I'm in the process of updating your marks if that's you. Oh yeah, good question, Tony. Who is Styx? This is somebody in the chat that I'm assuming is in this class, but I don't know who that represents. I don't know if they're paying attention. Feel like I'm not even gonna guess. Anyway, but if you do owe me assignments, as mentioned, I really do need them from you. So I wouldn't put them off. They are going to stack. We have 7 days and we're going to be doing something every day. So it's not like there's just like a free day. So please try and get your assignments in. I don't think that they're super onerous. They are a little bit time consuming, but I have to get them from you in order to get you a credit in the course. So like don't put them off. Okay, guys, I really would like everybody to get the credit. Anyway, the notes package that we're going to go through together today, it's posted right below day 14 here. It says day 14, the circulatory system. So you need a copy of that. You're going to open it in Cami. It's also linked right here where it says this notes package. I get that, Tony. The school wants people to log into everything with their school account. It's not like my personal policy or anything. I don't really care. Who is Styx though? Should I know who that is? No. No one knows. Okay. I would like to mark them as being present here, but I don't know who they are. Okay, anyway. So for the first part, we're going to go through some stuff together. So far, and you guys are going to have to reach into your memory here since it was 2 weeks ago, but we are doing an animal systems unit, anatomy of animals. And so far, we've looked at the digestive system in detail. We talked about the parts, structure, and function of the digestive system. We talked about the respiratory system and why you breathe. I think we covered that right before you guys left, right? We talked about the structures of it. What's that, sorry? And illnesses of the respiratory system, right? And then today, we're going to get into the last system that we're going to talk about, which is the circulatory system. Okay, so we're going to talk about the heart. I'm going to have a quick look and see if I have a heart that we can take apart, a pig heart. And if we do, then I'll do a quick dissection. Tomorrow, for sure, we're going to do a fetal pig dissection. So for the people that are here, hooray. I don't know if you're into it. Maybe you guys can do some of the cutting if you're interested.
Can I do some of the cutting?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely, yes. Yeah. And we're going to do basically a review, an overview of all of the systems because we'll look at them in the pig. So digestive system, let's follow it. Let's go through mouth, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine. We'll go through the whole thing. We'll do the same thing with the respiratory system, trachea, bronchus, bronchioles, lungs. We'll find them all. Yes, so I'm going to do the dissection. I have like a little camera setup thing here that sits over top and like projects down onto the dissection. It worked okay with my other class. I did it with my other class. It wasn't great. So I found a different stand that has a magnifying glass built into it. So for all the parts where I'm going to show you like fine detailed structures, I'm going to try and use the little magnifying glass on there. It actually worked okay the last time I used it. I used it for plants for the other class. Yes?
Are we going to do a lab after the dissection?
Are we going to do a lab?
About the dissection?
Like a lab report?
Yes.
No. Not for that particular one. But I welcome you guys to come up and like take a look at the system so that you can see. I'll come around to it. There's actually not that many people here, but I can just come around and show you the parts. They're a little bit stinky. If you plan on doing some cutting tomorrow, if you're in the room, don't wear like your best clothes, just in case you get like, a little bit of pig on them. It's kind of gross. But it's not that bad. We'll crack a window and it should be fine. Anyway, for the people at home, it is all going to be on video, so like you will see all of it. Where was I going with this? Right. So today we're going to talk about the structures of the circulatory system, the heart, and the blood vessels. We'll talk about what's in the blood. Hopefully we'll dissect a heart if I've got one. And lastly, we'll talk about some illnesses of the circulatory system like we did for the other systems. So we'll talk about some ways that the circulatory system can go wrong. So that's what we're going to try and get through today. In the second half, I'm hoping for us to start the medical technology presentation. So that's like sort of like the summative assignment for this unit. And the idea here is that you're going to pick a technology that is for either the treatment or diagnosis of an illness of one of those three systems. So pick respiratory, circulatory, or digestive. And just say, okay, well, ulcer. You know, like what's a technology that can be used to either either detect an ulcer or treat it. You can just pick whatever you want, you know, like a CT scan or whatever, okay? And then the project is you're gonna explain the technology, so tell me how a CT scan works, and you're gonna tell me about how it's used to detect your illness or treat your illness, okay? It's pretty straightforward. We'll go through the instructions later, but essentially you're gonna connect a technology to the systems that we've been talking about already. Okay, not a huge deal. Okay, so I'm gonna get started here before I stop wasting time here. You guys will need to open the notes package. I'm gonna be using a Google Slides presentation. I think this is the wrong one actually. Is this the one? Oh, no, that's the second one. I need this one. There we go. So I should mention all the information that's on the note here is taken directly from this, but it's not word for word exactly the same. So if people are having trouble figuring out what goes in the blanks, just say something, okay? I'd be happy to just tell you. Well, I think I altered the notes slightly after I made this, and so it's close, but it's not exactly the same. That wasn't intentional. I wasn't trying to make it confusing, so. Okay, let's talk about what you actually need in a circulatory system. So by the way, previously, we've talked about digestion. Is this actually showing up? You guys can see this, right?
Yes, it is. It's showing.
Okay, good. So previously we've talked about the digestive system. So it's there for you to break down and absorb nutrients into your blood. We've talked about the respiratory system, which is designed to get oxygen into your blood and carbon dioxide out of your blood. And then the last component, really, and this is linked to both of those systems, which is a system to move that stuff around. You have to get it to the different parts of your body. It's a system of tubes plus a pump, okay? So in order to get that distribution system to work, and this is true for all mammals, this unit is called Anatomy of Mammals. This system is virtually identical in all mammals, although the heart structure can be slightly different depending on the mammal, but it is relatively similar for all mammals. And in that system, there are always three components. Blood, so you need a liquid to actually transport this stuff around. And we're going to be talking about the different components that exist in the blood. But in short, it's gases, nutrients, waste, and hormones. You need tubes. So you need an actual system of tubes to get to distribute the blood all around the body. Mammals are unique in that they have a really complex system of small and large tubes, whereas other animals like insects often just have like a space where the blood, it's not exactly blood in insects, it's called pseudolymph, but it just kind of gets pushed around inside a big area as opposed to blood vessels. It almost has, the heart is almost like a little fan actually that just kind of circulates the fluid inside of a cavity. So it's not the same closed system that you see in mammals. Mammals have like tubes. They actually have like little tubes that pump all the blood around. And you want to keep the blood for the most part in the tubes. So you don't want it to come out of the tubes. Although the liquid component, the water component is continuous with the stuff in between. But usually you don't want the blood to come out. You guys have, I'm sure, had a bruise before. So a bruise is a perfect example of when those little tiny vessels are broken, ruptured, and then you get blood leaking into the space in between your cells, which is normally reserved just for water, and then you get that bruise. That's ecchymosis. So we're going to talk about blood vessels, and then the last component here is we're going to talk about the pump. Hopefully I have a pump I can take apart for you, a pig pump, pig heart, and we can look at the different components, and if not, I've got a good diagram, but either way, we're going to label the parts of the heart, and we're going to talk about what each part of the heart is for. Okay, so three components: blood vessels, and a heart. In general, why do you need these things? Well, you got to transport stuff around. It's a transport system. So first of all, you transport food. Food is the most important thing. And I should mention, by the way, that after this note, I will post a completed copy of this. I don't actually have a completed copy of the note, but I'm going to make one really quick after we're done here. And I will post that. So if you miss anything or it's too much for you to be writing down as we go, I will make that available to you at the end anyway. Okay, just as a heads up to you. Okay, anyway, it's used to carry food. We talked about the different components of food that are carried in the blood. Sugar, glucose, amino acids, which are when you break down proteins, right? And then the last component are fats. So those three things are the food parts that are carried around in the blood. When we were talking about the respiratory system, we talked about the gases that are carried around. So it's mostly oxygen and carbon dioxide. The blood is also a waste disposal system. So it's kind of like a medieval town with a river flowing through it. The river's for everything in a medieval town. You get your drinking water from the river and you throw your poop in the river. Everything just goes in the river. So we don't really do that anymore because it's not a terribly good idea. But the blood, your blood is really a lot like that. There is one single system for transporting everything. So it's waste products and food and everything you need is all in the same stream. So your cells make waste. They have cell poop, which is ammonia, uric acid, and urea. Those are the breakdown products when basically once your cell does all of its metabolism and everything, yeah, stuff gets old, it gets broken down, it has to get taken apart when it's done serving its, function as a protein or whatever. And when that stuff gets broken down by the lysosomes, it gets converted into ammonia, uric acid, and urea. And that stuff just gets dumped into the blood, which gets removed. And your kidneys do the eventual removal, but we don't need to worry about that. It's not really part of the circulatory system. So it's also a temperature and pH maintenance system. So you guys have to keep your body temperature at about 37 degrees Celsius. Too high, you die. Too low, you die. So you got to keep that temperature somewhere around 37 to keep all the processes working inside. And your blood is a really good system for that. If you're too hot, you can send your blood to the surface, and then that helps cool your body off. If you're too cold, you can send your blood into the core, and you can prevent heat loss out of your extremities, which is why your hands get so cold when it's cold in the winter, or your feet, because they're trying to preserve your body heat, so you pump the blood into your core. You can use it to heal wounds. So you need to transport material and cells, stem cells to the location where you have a break, cut, or whatever it happens to be. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that mechanism later when we talk about platelets. It has an immune function, so white blood cells, which are your immune cells that can kill invading bacteria, destroy virus particles, whatever, they are transported through the blood. So they're really cool. We'll get into them a little bit later and how they work. And lastly, it's a signaling pathway. So if you want to send a signal to everywhere in the body, you can dump some stuff into your blood and that chemical signal will go everywhere. If let's say that you are in the woods and you come across a bear, your adrenal glands are going to dump a whole bunch of adrenaline into your blood. That's to activate your sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight response. And so that adrenaline will increase your heart rate. It tells your heart cells to pump, 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 pump. It redirects blood away from your digestive system and into your muscles so that you're ready to run. It increases your respiratory rate, all the things that prepare you for battle. So that is all triggered by your adrenal glands dumping a bunch of adrenaline into your blood. Okay, cool. By the way, guys, I did catch that you arrived there, Mike and Nick. I'll get you on my attendance, don't worry. Anyway, so circulatory system does all of those things. It's multifunctional. In general, there are two circuits to where you pump the blood, okay? One half of the heart, the right side of the heart, can I draw in here? Yes, I can. So this side of the heart over here, the right side of the heart, is dedicated just to pumping blood to your lungs. Half of the heart is dedicated to pumping blood to your lungs. The part where blood goes to your lungs is really important. That's where you get your CO2 out and your O2 in. So you really have to make sure that there's a constant pressured flow going through the lungs or you die, right? You stop perfusing your body with oxygen. So half of the heart is dedicated just to sending blood to your lungs. That's the right side. We'll talk about the details of the anatomy of that a little bit more later. But essentially when blood is coming back from your body, it enters the right side and then goes to the lungs, gets its oxygen. Then it comes back from the lungs, and we'll look at this anatomy in a little bit more detail later, goes to the left side, and the left side is really the meaty part of the heart. It's much thicker than the right side because its job is to pump blood everywhere. So the left-hand side of the heart pumps to your brain, to the tips of your toes, to your fingers, like everywhere, all your organs and everything. So the left side is dedicated to pumping blood everywhere else that isn't your lungs. There are 2 chambers on each side, so in total you have 4 chambers in your heart, 4 areas. And we'll get into the anatomy of that later. But one is called the pulmonary circuit. The pulmonary circuit is the one that goes to the lungs. Pulmonary, anything when you hear the word pulmonary, it means of the lungs. And then the systemic circuit is on the other side. That's the rest of the system that isn't pulmonary, that isn't your lungs. The right side of the heart is only dealing with deoxygenated blood. Deoxygenated just meaning does not have oxygen in it because it's dropped it already off at your body's cells. And then once it goes through the lungs, obviously it becomes oxygenated. Now it's saturated with oxygen. And so the left side is only pumping oxygenated blood to the rest of your body. In the next couple slides, we're going to spend some time talking about what is actually in your blood. My number of viewers suddenly went to 0. Did everybody at home suddenly get super bored and leave? That's too bad. I'm hoping that that's a bug of some kind and it didn't actually go to 0. Or is it frozen? Is it frozen? Oh, I'm gonna be bummed. Oh, okay. Must be a bug. Okay, cool. You guys good? Ready? Okay, all right. Blood. There are 4 components. We're going to talk about what each component does in a little bit more detail. Oh, good point. Who's blues? Guys, can you use your school accounts when you log on to here so I don't have to ask this all the time? Who is that? I'd like to mark you present on my attendance too. Anyway, 4 components. Plasma, white blood cells, also called leukocytes. I'm going to call them leukocytes because that is what they're actually called. White blood cell is sort of just like a name based on what they look like. They are white, but their actual scientific name is leukocytes. So I'm going to call them leukocytes. Platelets, which are used for clotting, and then red blood cells, also known as erythrocytes. So I'm going to call red blood cells erythrocytes. You'll notice that a lot of conditions that are associated with the white blood cells, like leukemia, for example, is a good example. Leukemia is cancer of the white blood cells. I mean, if you know that white blood cells are leukocytes, then it's pretty obvious what that means. Anything that has the prefix erythro on it means that it is of the red blood cells. Erythro means of the red blood cells. So, for example, are you guys too young to be familiar with Lance Armstrong getting busted for cheating?
Oh, yeah.
You guys remember that? I don't know how long ago that was anymore. I feel like it was ages ago.
Yeah, he used steroids.
He didn't use steroids. He used erythropoietin. Erythropoietin is a chemical, a hormone that increases your red blood cells. Mm-hmm. So that's how he was doping. Was he was taking erythropoietin. So that's what I was going to use as my example. But anyway, that's how he was doping. So, anyone familiar with that? Other than Brody here? No, don't know Lance. He won the Tour de France cycling competition 8 times? 8-time winner? 7-time winner? Anyway, the most winningest cyclist of all time, but he was cheating. Womp womp. Okay, if you take a sample of blood from somebody and you put it in a centrifuge is just something that spins the blood around in a circle, and due to the centripetal force, it actually separates out the blood into several different layers so you can see what's in the blood. We used to do this lab in this course, but we're not allowed to take human body fluid samples anymore. Not for a long time, actually. Oh yeah, the last time I did this was my very first year teaching. Yes?
Would you ask a student to take their own blood?
We used to do it, yeah. So what you did is we had these little pinprick things. They're one-time use, and they would prick your fingertip, and then you take a capillary tube and put it over top, and it fills the capillary tube up with a blood sample, your blood, and then you put them in a capillary tube spinner, it spins it down, and then you actually can see this in the capillary tube. It's like 2 drops of blood total, so it's not a lot of blood, but we don't do human fluids. I mean, you could do that, but it's unnecessary. So you can do this with like 2 drops. You don't need very much. Anyway, we don't do human fluids anymore, so can't do it. But if you were to do that, what you can see in the capillary tube is a separation of the different components of your blood. So when you do that, about, oh, does it have the percentages on here? No, it's on the next slide, but I'll talk about these in general and then in more detail. But there's 3 basic components here that you can see. One is the plasma. Plasma is basically just water with stuff dissolved into it, so it looks clear, clearish, yellowish in the tube. What's that, sorry?
This is a percentage of the size.
For you guys. Oh, you guys can see that? No.
It says for one is currently 1, and then for plasma protein is 7% and 8%.
Right, you guys have that on your note. No? Oh, okay, I'll get there.
It's kind of on that too.
I'll get there. It's on my next slide. If you're looking for the numbers. Anyway, the plasma is the water component with stuff dissolved into it. The red blood cell component at the bottom is just basically solid red blood cells, which is for gas transport. And then the stuff in the middle, the little white coat in the middle, is white blood cells and a little bit of platelets, although the platelets are very, very little part of that. When you think about white blood cells and red blood cells, there's a huge difference in terms of the quantity you have of each. It's mostly red blood cells, and then one in every 500 or something like that is a white blood cell. So when you actually look at this under the microscope, if you look at a blood sample, it's basically all red, and then every once in a while you see a little white cell, but it's mostly red. So plasma, I'll talk about these in a little bit more detail now. This makes up about 55% of your blood. Question?
So underneath the diagram, there's a whole bunch of lines that have to be right over there.
Can I look at your screen here real quick? Yeah, you don't need to add anything to that slide. Yeah, you don't need to add anything there. Don't worry about what goes there. Probably should have deleted that part. Yes?
I actually have a question. What's a platelet?
Platelet. We're going to get to that. That's like the last thing in this series, but I will talk about them. So plasma makes up a little bit more than half of your blood. It's almost completely water. It has a little bit of protein in it. So protein includes those hormones that we talked about previously that are circulating in your blood. And it has some other stuff dissolved in it, a little bit of sugar dissolved in it, electrolytes, that's like sodium and potassium, a little bit, and a little bit of gas. So some oxygen and some carbon dioxide can actually just dissolve right into the liquid part, into the water part, but not much. So not much of the actual gas transport is done by the plasma. This is an interesting one because this makes up such a large percentage of your blood, oftentimes when people lose blood volume, like you're in the hospital, you go to the ER, they can give you just plasma, okay? It does dilute your red blood cells a little bit, but that's normally fine unless you lose a lot of blood. But they can just give you plasma. You'll notice that the plasma here doesn't really have too much in it that we can't just make. So for example, water, yep, no problem. The proteins that are in there are not absolutely essential. So you can actually make fake plasma. It doesn't have the protein component because producing that is extremely difficult to do. And you can do the other solutes part. You can include sugar, glucose in it. You can include electrolytes, sodium, potassium. So you can give people fake plasma if you don't have any fresh plasma, which is what you get from like a blood bank or whatever. However, because it's missing that protein component, you can't do this a lot. So there's a limit to how much fake plasma you can give people, which is why we prefer donated plasma. So a lot of the buffer component of this, the part of this liquid that keeps your blood pH in a normal range, there's like a specific series of proteins that do that keep the blood pH correct, like how acidic your blood is. And that is very difficult to replicate. So we don't have a good fake plasma. It's an okay one, that you can use in small quantities, but you can't pump people like full of fake plasma without starting to cause problems with the pH balance of your blood. Yes?
So when you donate plasma, they basically just, what's the thing that,
Centrifuge.
yeah, they just put your blood into a big centrifuge and just do that.
Yep. So they get bags of plasma from your blood donation, which is pretty much water, and then they get the blood cell part of the donation, which they can also give to people. So they do separate it out though for different uses. A lot of people only need the plasma component. If you've lost a little bit of blood, a liter-ish or less, or maybe slightly more than a liter in that area, you can just give people plasma. It's not a big deal, it won't dilute your red blood cells that much. If you've lost 4 liters of blood, you start losing like a significant quantity, then you got to start giving people blood, because otherwise you won't have enough red blood cells to properly perfuse everything. But it's better to separate that out, because the red blood cells come with a whole host of problems. So when you give somebody red blood cells, you can reject them. So there is always the possibility that you cause some kind of weird allergic reaction when you use red blood cells. So we usually only use them if you have to use them. Otherwise, the plasma component is pretty bulletproof. It's mostly water. So that one's a lot easier to give people. The red blood cell component, otherwise called erythrocytes, you make those in your bone marrow. They don't have a nucleus. So these are really interesting cells in that they are enucleated. If you look at them under a microscope, well, not a light microscope, these are extremely, extremely small. So if you were to look at these under our light microscopes, they are 1/10 of the size of a normal animal cell. They're teeny, teeny, tiny. Even on high magnification, they just look like dots, basically, under the microscope. So they're quite small. There's a reason that they're so small. Why do you think they'd have to be so small? What do you think?
Because they have to transfer oxygen throughout your body.
Right, and you got to squeeze them through tiny little tubes, right? So your blood vessels are really small tubes. So in order to get them through those really tiny tubes, they have to be small. So they are teeny, teeny, tiny little things. Because they don't have a nucleus, they don't live super long. I got to look this up, but I think it's something like 14 days. Because they can't make new proteins and stuff. They don't have a nucleus. So when they're done, your, what's the name of this organ? Not pancreas, spleen. Your spleen will filter out the old red blood cells and convert them into a waste product, which your kidneys remove. So your spleen is partially like a filtering mechanism for old blood cells. Yes? For the what, sorry? So they are biconcave discs. A biconcave disc is basically like an inner tube. That's what it is. So it's like it has like a dip on one side and then like a round part and then a dip on the other side. So it's concave on both sides.
They do not have a nucleus. That's it. And then the second one would be
Biconcave disc.
and for the last one, it says contains hemoglobin, which has a strong chemical affinity.
It's on my next slide.
Oh, that's another.
It's on my next slide, yeah. So in order to transport O2, and to a lesser extent CO2, it does transport CO2, although a lot of the CO2 gets dissolved into the plasma. But in order to transport O2, they have a special complex in the middle, and you guys have probably heard of hemoglobin before, maybe not. But the hemoglobin is the red part of your blood. It's what makes your blood red. And the reason it's red is the same reason that rust is red, because it contains oxygenated iron, or oxidized iron. So there are iron atoms at the center of every one of these proteins. They're called heme groups. And iron likes to stick to oxygen. If you've ever had something rust, you know that it's chemically attracted to oxygen and turns into rust. Yes?
When it says each hemoglobin molecule carries 4 oxygen atoms.
That's right.
But on here it says each heme group carries blank oxygen molecules.
1. Each heme group has 1,
Oh,
and a hemoglobin is 4 heme groups. So each one of these things right here is a heme group. So each one has 1 iron in the middle, and there are 4 of them in a hemoglobin.
So it's 4 oxygen molecules.
4 iron.
So what? The candle is 1 oxygen molecule.
Each heme group, a heme group is a protein,
Yes.
has 1 iron in the middle. And there are 4 of those in a hemoglobin. So in total, a hemoglobin has 4 irons in it.
No, but the question is saying how each each heme group carries how much oxygen molecule?
Oh, 4. Each iron can bind to 4 oxygens. Okay, so in total, that would be 4 oxygens for this heme group, 4 for this heme group, 4 for this heme group, and 4 for this heme group. That's 16. So one hemoglobin, which is at the center of every red blood cell, can carry 16 oxygen molecules. Oh, no, I got this mixed up. No, terrible. Hold on, let me clear this. No, I have this totally mixed up. It's been a little bit while since I've done this. Sorry, each iron can carry a oxygen molecule, okay? So you have 1 per heme group, and there's 4 heme groups. So in total it carries 4. Okay, there we go. That's what it actually is. So each hemoglobin carries 4. I knew that number didn't sound right. I'm like doing the math in my mind here. That doesn't make sense. And this is what it is. Each one carries 1.
In your slides, you have other information that's not on the note.
Yeah, don't worry about it. If I didn't put it in the note, it's something I don't need you to know. Once oxygen binds with a hemoglobin, it turns a bright red color. Very similar to the way that iron will turn bright red when it is oxidized. It's essentially the same chemical reaction that's happening. The difference here is that the hemoglobin allows the iron to let go of the oxygen a lot easier than an iron atom would let go of the oxygen. If this was just a free-floating iron, you wouldn't be able to remove the oxygen. You wouldn't be able to reduce it once you needed to turn it over, right? Because it's got to drop off that oxygen. You don't want to have a death grip on the oxygen. So what the hemoglobin does is make it easier to drop off the oxygen at the destination, chemically. So it is bright red blood, hemoglobin, once it has been exposed to oxygen. Now I want to mention this because this is something that always messes with people, and that is that blood is not does not turn blue when it drops off its oxygen. So I want to show you the difference between these two. There we go. That's like the first thing that comes up when you Google it. There's a good picture. Perfect. Okay, so that's the difference between blood that has oxygen attached to it and blood that doesn't have oxygen attached to it. Bright red means oxygen, yes, and dark purplish red, I guess it means that this is deoxygenated blood. So it doesn't turn blue. For some reason, every diagram in every textbook ever made shows deoxygenated blood in blue vessels. Question?
I think they do that so it's just an easier visualization.
It is, and I agree with that. It is an easy visualization, but it leads to so many people telling me that deoxygenated blood is blue, so it definitely causes confusion. So your blood does not turn blue at any point. There's no blue blood. Your veins, which carry your deoxygenated blood, are always close to the surface. So if you look on your wrist, that's a vein. So it's carrying deoxygenated blood. It looks blue. I get it. Okay, the vein looks blue. But the actual blood inside that vessel is that color, okay? It's just like a dark red. So this actually has to do with additive color theory. So if you take the skin on top plus the parts of the spectrum, the color spectrum that the vessel absorbs, plus the colors of the spectrum that the blood absorbs, all together, they reflect blue light, okay? So it does look blue from the surface. But I promise you that if you were to cut open, don't do this, but if you were able to cut it open and look at it, this vessel is not blue, and the blood inside it is also not blue, okay? I guarantee you that it's not.
But why do they look blue?
Because of the colors, objects are the color of light that they reflect, right? So because a bunch of different colors of light, not the blue part of the spectrum, are absorbed by your skin and the blood vessel, The actual color that gets reflected at the end is blue, but it's a combination of what is absorbed by your skin and the blood vessel and the blood put together. So it's not actually the color of the blood or the vessel. So they are not blue. I promise they're not. Anyway, so let's move on here. But deoxygenated blood is dark red. Leukocytes. Leukocytes are white blood cells. So this is the component of the blood that is your immune system. It is there to fight bacteria, viruses, and get confused by things that you're allergic to. It also tries to fight those things, but those things are not technically dangerous for your body. Yes?
So for the first one, will be just the bacteria and the damaged cells.
And damaged cells, that's true. They also are responsible for removing damaged cells. Yep. I'm sorry, did you have a question as well?
Is the slideshow, are you gonna keep it on there, can we find it?
It is posted. So if you look on the content page, it's right underneath where the note is. It says like this slideshow or whatever. You can click on it and actually opens the slideshow for you. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, how the white blood cells work is by looking at shapes. That's really what they do in essence, okay? So a shape in the context of when you get down to the molecular size are called antigens. There's no way for me to write on here. Can I make this bigger somehow? No. Oh, I really want to draw on here. I wonder if my pen will work. My pen work? Oh yeah, it does. Cool. So antigens are basically like little shapes. And the proteins that are sticking off of the side of your cells, they're sticking off of viruses, they're sticking off of bacteria, are covered in little shapes, okay? Those proteins have a shape. And your cells have specific shapes on their outside. Your proteins have specific shapes. Ideally, do you have to be writing things down? Yes, Nick. So this is all in a note. It's posted in the content area. Sorry, I think you missed the beginning of this. And you need to open that note in Cami, and then you're gonna be like annotating, adding this information to the note. Sorry if you didn't know that. Lance Armstrong is a cyclist, by the way, Tony. You're thinking of Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon. Different Armstrong. Much cooler Armstrong, in my opinion. Anyway, antigens, little shapes. So your white blood cells are trained to recognize your shapes, okay? I don't want to get into all the terminology, so these shapes have names and stuff, but you don't need to worry about that. It's a series of shapes. So all the time, your white blood cells are running across the surface of your cells. They're going all over the place in your body, looking at the shapes and going, yep, good shape, good shape, good shape, good shape, good shape, good shape. This is all the shapes I'm looking for, until they find a shape that doesn't belong. When they find a shape that doesn't belong, they initiate an immune response. So they will release some hormones into the blood to attract other white blood cells, because essentially they're finding something that doesn't belong there. And then depending on what type of white blood cell they are, they may eat that cell, or they may recruit another cell to eat it, or they may recruit a cell to make antibodies. So antibodies are flags that go on the bad shapes, okay? So other types of white blood cells actually build a flag that perfectly fits onto the shape. It's like a little flag, and the little flag is basically, it's a bad guy flag, okay? It's to mark it so that other white blood cells can very clearly identify this is a bad guy. Question?
So what is the flag made out of then?
Proteins. It's a protein flag. Yep.
And then that's cool.
I think it's really cool. Yeah. So this, by the way, this is how a vaccine works. So when you take a vaccine, what you're doing is you're putting the shapes into your body of whatever thing that you're trying to protect against with the vaccine. And if you give your immune system the right shapes, they will build flags for those shapes, pre-build them so that they're ready to go. And if you do ever run into that thing again, they will immediately have the shapes, the flags on hand to cover the shapes. So if you have the flags ready to go, oftentimes you can kill that infection before it ever takes hold. There may only be a few of them, they're already covered in flags, and your immune system will remove it. That's how immunity works. So ideally, that's what happens if the vaccine is good vaccine. Not all vaccines work super well. So some of them have a high efficacy, they're like 90% effective, some of them are 5% effective. So ideally, this is kind of pertinent to our current situation here, but what we're looking for is a vaccine for COVID that has a high efficacy. That is, when you give it to people, 90-ish% of the time, you immediately have those flags on hand and you can prevent an infection. So that's ideally what we're trying to design here. And it all depends usually on the types of flags that you are attempting to trigger. So, and we don't always know that in advance which ones work the best, which is why there's 200 vaccines in development. So they're all looking at a different series of flags to build. Anyway, so those are antigens. So that is what your white blood cells are doing all the time. They're either eating things with shapes on them that don't belong, antigens that don't belong, or they are preparing defenses for future attacks of those things by building antibodies, a system of flags. They have a really cool ability to basically travel anywhere in your body. So you can, if you have an infection or even a cut or something like that, that will trigger an immune response and you will get inflammation, swelling in that area. And the swelling is just to allow white blood cells to exit your blood vessels and congregate in that one spot. In other words, you're making it easier for your white blood cells to get there. So that's what swelling is. Swelling is an immune response to allow your white blood cells to get to a particular area to remove invaders. It's usually good. You usually want that to happen to some extent. When you're having an allergic reaction, what's happening is that a shape that is not dangerous to your body, like peanuts, okay, there are shapes on peanuts as well. Those shapes are not dangerous for your body. However, your immune cells might think that they are. They will label that as a dangerous shape and initiate an immune response to the shapes of peanuts. That's a very common one for people. In which case, you will get a very severe systemic immune response where all the white blood cells are trying to congregate. They're trying to escape basically your blood vessels and find these shapes when they don't need to. It's basically totally maladaptive. So that's anaphylaxis. And people experience anaphylaxis differently, but oftentimes you get swelling and makes it difficult for you to breathe and stuff like that. So you can have a fatal allergic response. So the immune system does a great job at flagging these things and removing them, but sometimes it does a little bit too good of a job. So when it does too good of a job, then you start getting into some problems as well. So you don't want your immune system to be too active, because that has its own problems associated with it. Now, on the flip side of that, your immune system can also be very low active. You could have a very weak immune system, in which case you can't even get rid of normal things, fungi on your skin and things like that, things that you have right now. You have bacterial colonies all over your skin, and your white blood cells kind of keep everything in check. They don't let anything get too out of control. But if you have a really weakened immune system, you get lots of skin infections and all kinds of stuff, staph infections, fungal infections, which is what happens when you get HIV/AIDS, because that inhibits your immune system. And so you end up getting a lot of things that normal people would have no problem removing, but you would have necessarily a problem with that with your immune system. Okay, so those are the white blood cells. That's what they're doing. They make a bunch of enzymes. They can bust proteins apart on the surface of bacteria. They can eat viruses. And we mentioned the antibodies, which are just flags. It's such a cool system. The fact that we figured out a way to harness the power of the immune system by injecting something harmless into people is really insane. It's amazing that we figured that out. Vaccines are really an unbelievable human miracle, really. It's so cool that we figured out how to do that. If you, this is kind of probably for a different course, history course or something, but if you look at the growth of the human population, once we invented vaccines, which is somewhere in the late 1700s, I believe. It caused like a huge growth in the human population because a lot of illnesses that very regularly caused like a lot of deaths were prevented through vaccines. And so we really took the cap off human population growth, for better or worse. Okay, last thing I'm going to talk about here is this idea of blood platelets. Platelets are cell pieces. They're not really full cells. They have a membrane, so they are kind of like cells. They also can release hormones into the blood, so they have cell-like properties. They're missing a bunch of the components of a full cell. So I'll call it a cell fragment. They also don't have a nucleus. They live about 10 days. And their main job is to detect when there is a hole in your circulatory system. So they're floating around, and when they notice that there's a leak, or some of the cells are damaged in the lining of your circulatory system, they initiate the leak prevention pathway, okay? Basically, they are the leak repair cells, pseudocells, they're almost cells. So that leak repair system is called your clotting mechanism. You may have heard of this before, blood clotting. So what they do is, first of all, they aggregate, they get together around the leak. And they release a chemical called thrombin. By the way, if you know someone who has difficulty clotting, which is, there's a number of illnesses that cause difficulty with blood clotting so that they bleed profusely. This is somewhere in this pathway, this mechanism does not work very well. So maybe your platelets don't release thrombin. Maybe the thrombin doesn't bind with the next thing in the chain very well, or something along those lines. Question?
What is
It's just a hormone. So it's a protein that is released by platelets. It's basically a signal to tell all the cells around it, we got a leak here, is what it is. We got a leak here, messages that it's sending out into the blood. That message sticks to another molecule called fibrin. Fibrinogen. It's called fibrinogen. And it turns that message into another message, another chemical called fibrin. And that fibrin turns on the actual sorry, I'm getting confused here. Thrombin is a message, okay? It's released by the platelets. There's a hole here. And there are these sticky proteins. They're kind of like pieces of a spider web, really, floating through your blood, but they're not usually sticky. Because if they were sticky, they get all stuck to each other and stick to the walls of your blood vessels and stuff. So they're not sticky. They're just pieces of web that are floating around. Okay, they're called fibrinogen. And when they run into that message that says we have a leak, they get changed from non-sticky fibrinogen into sticky fibrin. It makes them sticky when they read that message, okay? And so then those spiderweb pieces will start to stick to the platelets. There is actually spots, it's like Velcro, actually, kind of, where the platelets form one side of the Velcro and the fibrin forms the other side of the Velcro. And so if you think about all these little pieces of webbing getting stuck to the platelets, they start to build a net. And the net covers up the hole in your circulatory system. So that's what's going on in this diagram here. We've got some platelets down here, and those platelets are sticking to this fibrin that's been activated in the blood, and that's going to make a net that prevents red blood cells from shooting out the hole. So that's the clotting mechanism. I'm going to show you a picture of this on the next page here.
That's pretty cool.
I think it's really cool. So the platelets they're a little bit hard to see here. Remember that they're not full cells. They're kind of just like cytoplasm in a little envelope with some hormones inside. So they really don't have a full cell structure, but this is a platelet right here, and this is a platelet right here, and this is a platelet right here. So they don't really look like cells from the outside either. They're very wispy looking. And then the stuff in between, I wish there was another color I could highlight. It only gives me red, which is annoying. But these little lines in between are the fibrin. Okay? So they're floating through the blood, and they will stick to those platelets and make a net. And you can see that the red blood cells that are behind here are actually stuck in the net. So it prevents red blood cells from escaping. It creates a net so that stuff stops flowing out. And this usually, as long as it's working properly, happens very quickly after you cut yourself. Question?
Yeah, what happens if there's too much pressure on the red blood cells and then that just voids?
So that happens if you puncture an artery, which is under very high pressure. So unless you apply your own pressure from the outside to lower the pressure across and allow the clotting to occur, it is just going to keep bleeding. And then you will exsanguinate, so you'll run out of blood eventually. So for an arterial injury, because arterial blood is under very high pressure, you do have to restrict blood flow to that area, usually with pressure, in order to allow the clotting mechanism to begin. If you have a really big cut, like let's say like an artery is severed, you can't, this is insufficient. So you won't be able to like repair that. You may die, but in the meantime, you actually have to pinch the end of the blood vessel like manually. You have to close it until it can be surgically repaired. So that will require a surgical repair. You're not gonna like clot that and fix that. So if it's a large arterial injury, then there's no way to repair it this way. Small injuries to the artery that are small holes, as long as you apply pressure, you can repair. And more likely, because arteries are usually very deep, so they're not near the surface. So you don't get a lot of those injuries to your arteries, but your veins are all very close to the surface. So you're much more likely to get one of these injuries to a vein. If you do happen to cut a vein, veins are fairly low pressure, so usually a little bit of pressure will allow the clotting mechanism to take place. So it's not as big of a deal on veins, and veins are near the surface. So the other things that could potentially get damaged here are capillaries. Capillaries are only like one cell around. They're very, very small vessels that run through everything. And that's like if you've got a paper cut or something, you're cutting capillaries. In that case, you can totally block off a capillary with this clotting mechanism. So it works quite well. Cool. So I think that's it. Those are the components of the blood. Are we at the end? I think so. Of the first part, anyway. This is a person. Anybody ever been to Body Worlds before? It's a traveling display. So Body Worlds is really cool. It is a number of models that are made from bodies. So people donate their bodies, and then when they're used, what they do is they use a chemical process to convert their tissues into basically plastic. They plasticize the tissues of a body. It's really cool. So they can plasticize certain tissues and dissolve other tissues. So what they often do is they will remove the skin, and then they'll plasticize the muscles underneath, or plasticize the bones, or there's a whole bunch of these. If you ever have a chance to go and see it, it's a really cool exhibit. Question?
So that's a real person?
That's a real person, yeah.
I feel bad.
Well, I mean, they died.
Well, yeah.
They died first.
That'd be a horrible way to live.
Fair enough. I mean, I will say that these people donated their bodies to this, so they did want this, but fair enough. I wouldn't want to go against my will and have this done. I'm with you. But what they do for these ones right here, this is really cool, is they inject this plasticizer into the blood vessels, and they make the blood vessels into a plastic, and then they use an acid to dissolve everything else. So this person has had their blood vessels basically turned into plastic, and then everything under the blood vessels and on over top of the blood vessels has been dissolved away with an acid. So what's left at the end is just the blood vessels, which is what you can see here. The reason why I think this is so cool is you can see how vascularized, how many blood vessels are actually in your face. It is crazy. You have so many blood vessels running through your tissues. Like, look at that. Like, that's how many blood vessels you have in your face. So it's really hard to understand how much vascularization, like how much blood vessel actually is in your tissues, but they are totally permeated with blood vessels. All of your organs, your skin, everything is totally permeated with blood vessels like this. You have kilometers and hundreds of kilometers of blood vessels in your body, if you were to actually like follow them end to end. And no cell in your body, that's alive anyway, is more than 4 cells away from a blood vessel. So they really have to run absolutely everywhere inside your body, which is kind of cool. So it's a very complex network of vessels. I should show you some more pictures from body parts because it's so cool. They also have a bunch of animals, like they have like an elephant and stuff.
Oh, that's fucking nuts.
It's really cool. Oh, this dude's holding his skin. That's crazy.
Oh, so that's a thing.
I actually took a field trip to go see. It used to be at the Science Center. I took a field trip in my anatomy class in second year university to go see it. Oh, this is a cool one. This is like a cross section that they did of a person, where they just cut them sagittally this way after they plasticized them. So you can see all the organs inside. Ooh, that's cool. And they're doing all kinds of things, like there's like a person playing a saxophone and like, it's like all kinds of stuff. Here's a person where they removed their skeleton and like placed it behind the person in the same position. It's really cool. Oh yeah, and there's one where there's a person riding a horse. They did a horse one underneath. It's really cool. A little bit macabre. A little macabre. If it wasn't real people, I think it would be. It might be a little bit better, but I mean it's 100% accurate. It is a real person. So this one was at the exhibit I went to. This is a camel. They had a camel there and a little baby camel. Oh, this guy's touching it. That's weird. You're definitely not supposed to touch them.
How would you touch those?
You're definitely not supposed to touch them. Oh man.
What the hell?
Face, like, all the skin.
What, this one right here?
Yeah, it looks like it's like a predator.
Well, I think they cut it this way and then kind of separated it out so you could see all the different layers of the face. The eyes are the only part that's not real.
Oh, okay.
So the eyes, you can't preserve the eyes like this so that they're made of glass. They're glass eyes.
So like that's
It just looks so creepy.
It does, yeah. It would be almost better if they didn't do the eyes, like just left them out. They're not real though. The eyes aren't real. But all the other stuff is. Ooh, look at that giraffe. Okay, I'm getting off topic here, but there's there's a lot of this. If you ever have a chance to see this, it's really cool. Okay, where are we here? So we just got through this, right?
we're on the heart.
Heart. All right. Cool. Oh, do I not have this filled in?
Yeah, there's no
Hold on, I have it on a different page.
explanation for that part.
Here we go. Okay, let's talk about the pump that does all this stuff. The heart. Actually, you know what? While you guys write this down, I'm gonna actually see if I can find a heart. Give me 2 seconds. Pretty sure I got an extra. I got a heart. Yeah, I'll just do it on this desk right. Actually, can I do that? I think what we're gonna do here is I will go through the parts first. We'll label the diagram, and then I will show you what it looks like on the actual heart. I'll cut a heart open, and then you can see inside. Yeah. The really cool thing about these hearts, I'll put it in front of the camera so you guys can see this at home too. The really cool thing about these hearts is that this is the size of a human heart. So a little bit bigger than like almost like a fist and a half ish is about the size of your heart. So this is a human heart size. A little bit small human. This would be like a little human. But so human heart size. So if you get them from a really big pig, like a mature pig, they are the same size as a human heart. So this is from like a slightly smaller pig. I gotta get my laptop on here. It's not too stinky. We should be okay.
Disgusting.
You know, be terrifying. Oh, you know, be terrifying.
What's that?
Where's your
The
shirt?
heart started
Where's-
just bleeding.
Those ones aren't going to start beating. They've been sitting in the preservative for a long time. But we have done fresh hearts. I prefer fresh hearts, which we get from the slaughterhouse. And those ones, I bet you if you shop them, they probably would at least contract.
I would love to do that.
That'd be super cool. I would love to see that. One sec, guys. I'm getting set up here, and then we'll go through the parts first before I do this section. Something down on my desk so I don't get any heart pieces on it. I don't really use newspaper, but I don't have any newspaper in the school right now. Okay, so let's go through the parts. I'm going to start on the side of the heart where blood actually returns from the body. Okay, that's the right side of the heart. One thing to note about this is that when you look at the heart, the right side of the heart, which would be like this, oh, that didn't come up very well. Let me use something that's just a little more visible. The right side of the heart, which would be like this side over here. When you look at it, you're like, but that's on the left, right? I'm saying right, but this is on the left. The reason that this is called the right side of the heart is because it would be like if you were looking at somebody's heart, okay? If they were facing you. So if you were looking at somebody's heart and they're facing you, this is the right side of their heart, right? It's on your left, but it's on their right. So it's a little bit confusing. This is called the right side of the heart because it's the person's right, but it's on your left. All right? So don't get confused by that. For some reason, everybody gets confused by that and forgets which side is the left side of the heart and which side is the right. This is on the person's right, but your left. Okay? So blood is going to come from the lower part of your body. Remember, it's dropped off its oxygen. We talked about this with the respiratory system. It's dropped off its oxygen in all your body cells. And same thing from the top. You got blood coming from the upper half of your body, your head and your arms, and it's used up all the oxygen. It's going to come in through a big vein at the top called the superior vena cava. I've used purple on here to indicate deoxygenated blood. Okay? I could have used blue, but I want to get away from using blue because the blood is not blue. But it is deoxygenated. So superior in anatomical terms just means upper. So the things that are higher in anatomy are called superior. And vena cava, cava in Latin just means cave. So this is the upper cave vein. And the reason it's called a cave is because it's big. It's big enough in a human that you could take 2 fingers and literally put it inside of the vein. So it's quite a big vein coming from the top half of your body. When you see it, if you ever do a human dissection, it is quite a big vein. You can put 2 fingers in it. So superior vena cava basically just means the upper big vein. Okay? And then the one below it, below in anatomical terms is sub would make sense. If it was the sub-superior vena cava, it would actually mean that it was behind it from this view. But you're on the right track. So in anatomical terms, below, this way below, like towards the bottom, is inferior. So this is, the one below is called the inferior vena cava, the lower big vein. Sub makes total sense. Sub would just mean deeper in this context.
Oh.
Okay, so we got our upper big vein and our lower big vein, and they're both going into the same pocket inside the heart, which is this pocket up here. Those pockets are called chambers, and that chamber is called the right atrium. Don't worry about that stuff above and below. I'm gonna go in order. So anytime we pass something, I will talk about it, then you can write it down, okay? So don't worry about tricuspid and right AV valve at this exact moment. So that part on top of the heart, the right atrium, is very small. It looks so significant in this diagram, but it's really not to scale. It's like a tiny little flap at the top. And the only thing that the atrium does, it does pump. All the chambers of the heart pump blood. But its only job is just to pump the blood down into this bigger chamber underneath. That's all that it does. So it pumps blood 1 inch away to a chamber right below it, and that chamber is called the right ventricle. So that's this big chamber at the bottom down here, the right ventricle. This area here. And you can even see from this diagram that the right ventricle is a lot thicker if you look at the actual thickness of the ventricle, which would be like this diameter right here of the muscle. And it's got to be a lot stronger because instead of just pumping it 1 inch like the atrium does, it's pumping it to the lungs. And it's got to pump it with quite a bit of pressure because remember that it's got to push the blood through all those tiny little blood vessels in the lungs that are running around all the alveoli. So in order to get it through all of those, yeah, it's got to pump pretty hard, a lot harder than the atrium does. So that's what this thing is going to do. It's going to pump the blood to the lungs. On the way down here, we passed a little valve. So the valve is in pink right here. It's this part right here. And that valve prevents blood from going backwards back into the venous system again. You don't want blood to go backwards, right? You only want to pump it in one direction. So this valve shuts when the ventricle pumps, and it prevents blood from going backwards into the veins, which would be catastrophic if it did that. And so that valve that prevents blood from going back is called the right, because it's on the right side of the heart, Atrioventricular Valve. So atrioventricular just means between the atrium and the ventricle. Atrioventricular. Very often, you will see this written as the right AV valve. So people just say AV valve for short instead of atrioventricular. So if you ever see AV, that's what they're referring to. If you've ever heard of somebody having a heart murmur, one of the things that causes a heart murmur is this valve not closing properly. So if it doesn't close very well and a little bit of blood squirts backwards when the ventricle contracts, that makes like an extra sound when you listen to the heart pumping. That's a murmur. A murmur is just a bonus sound. Okay, so the ventricle contracts, it squeezes, the right ventricle contracts, and it pushes blood up past another valve. Okay, this valve right here prevents blood from going, again, from going backwards. That's what all the valves do. But this is to prevent the blood from going backwards into the ventricle again. So once it gets pumped out of the heart, it falls back on this valve and it doesn't go back into the heart again. So that valve right there is called the tricuspid. Sometimes you hear about people having tricuspid surgery. And again, that's because this valve is leaky, and so they may need a replacement valve. There are fake valves that you can get that are made of plastic. They don't work super well. I think the preferred method is still to get them from pigs. So you can get a tricuspid valve that is taken from a pig heart and transplanted into a human, which is pretty crazy. Question?
Yeah, my grandma had her valves replaced.
Mm-hmm.
And
do you know what hers were?
They were metal.
Metal. Cool. Cool. I didn't even know that they did that, but that's cool. Metal valve.
She had pig valves, but they dissolved.
They don't last forever. Yeah.
So she had to get metal. So each time I had listened to her, it was like a clicking sound.
Oh, that's really interesting. You could hear it. Oh, that's so cool. I've never had a chance to hear that before, but that's really cool though. Because what you hear when you hear the heart sounds, we're not going to spend too much time talking about this, but what you're actually hearing is the valve snapping shut. So you can actually hear that they're metal. Oh, that's so awesome. That's really cool. I almost want to look that up right now. That's cool. Anyway, that valve is called the tricuspid. So sometimes people get them replaced. So you got this pumping of deoxygenated blood. It goes through the valve. And now it's got to go through a pretty thick vessel up here that is going to carry this blood to the lungs. Anything that's of the lungs is going to have the word pulmonary in front of it. So pulmonary just means of the lungs. So this is the artery of the lungs, the pulmonary artery. Arteries are always going away from the heart. So if it's something is pumping blood away from the heart, that's an artery. This is a good opportunity for me to get my guy. You'll be able to see this on the fetal pig as well. Camera so you can kind of see this. Okay, so you got your two lungs. Can you see this? Everybody's able to see it? I'll get them out of the way here. Notice that the heart, which is right here, is positioned pretty much right in the center of the two lungs. It's a little bit more to the left side than to the right, but it's more or less centered. in between the two lungs. So when the right ventricle pumps, it does not have to pump blood very far. It goes out through this vessel right here. So this is the pulmonary artery. And then you can see that it's supposed to be like separating out into the various tissues of the lungs. It goes, there's another side to that which is buried underneath here, but it's going to go to this lung as well. So just pumping blood right next door to the two. Woo! Oh no, I'm losing heart. Okay, and once the blood has filtered through all the different capillaries in the heart, it's now full of oxygen, but it's got to get pumped to the rest of the body. So it's going to return back through this vessel right here, which is going to go into now on the other side of the heart. Okay, so now we're in the left atrium over here. So this little vessel that comes back in is called the pulmonary vein. So that's the vein of the lungs, pulmonary. Back on here. Now so we're coming back now to the heart after we've gone to the lungs. Now I'm going to use red to show that we're looking at oxygenated blood now. So this is oxygenated blood returning back to the heart, and it goes into that another tiny chamber on top of the heart called the left atrium. Okay, now that little sac chamber at the top of the heart is going to pump blood down through another valve. So here's another valve on this side. And this valve, oh, I forgot to label it. This valve is the valve on the other side. So instead of being the right AV valve, this is the left AV valve. I'm just going to call it AV, but AV stands for Atrioventricular Valve. So there's the right atrioventricular valve. This is the left atrioventricular valve. Valve. Really having trouble talking. So it goes through that valve and then down into the big chamber down here to this chamber right here. So that big chamber at the bottom is a ventricle. But this is the ventricle on the other side, otherwise known as the left ventricle. Why on earth did I write bicuspid in purple? That should be red. I don't know if you guys see this in the diagram, but there are these little strings attached to the valve right here, these little strings here. So those little cords keep the valve from prolapsing, from getting blown out backwards. And these are what are known as your heartstrings. So you do have little strings in there. I'll show you what they look like when I dissect the actual heart. There are little heartstrings in there. So their official name is chordae tendineae. You guys don't really need to know that, but those are your heartstrings. So they prevent this from prolapsing. So prevent the valve from going backwards. So if you take a look at how thick the tissue is over here on the left side of the heart as compared to the right, so over here the tissue is, in real life, something like 1/2 centimeter on the right side, and then on the left side it's like 2 centimeters. So it's quite a bit bigger. And then the reason for that is when this side of the heart pumps, you got to pump to the entire body. So you're not just pumping to the lungs, which are right next door. Now you got to pump blood everywhere, top of the head, fingers, everywhere you got to send it. So this is quite a bit more of a task, and there's a lot more pressure on this side. So the left ventricle is going to contract, and it's going to push blood up through another valve. That's this valve right here. And that valve is called the bicuspid. That's another valve that could potentially be leaky, and you may have to have your bicuspid replaced. I think it's much more common to have problems with your bicuspid than your tricuspid because it's under a lot more back pressure. So there's a lot more pressure passing past this one. The reason why, by the way, it's called a bicuspid is because it has two flaps of the valve. So there's like a flap over here and a flap over here where the blood would like pass through in between the two flaps. So two flaps is bicuspid, whereas the other one on the other side, this valve right here, has three flaps. That's why it's called a tricuspid. 3 cusps. Okay, so the blood gets pumped up here through the bicuspid and then through the largest and thickest blood vessel in your entire body, the aorta. So the aorta is at extremely high pressure for a blood vessel, about 3 psi. So when you think about that, that's like the pressure inside a properly pumped up football. That's a lot of pressure. So when you get liquid under that pressure, if you were to puncture it, you can imagine how quickly the blood actually exits your body if you puncture your aorta very fast. If you puncture it right to the surface, it'll shoot out of your body like 5-6 feet out of your body. So it's under a lot of pressure. So you can imagine if you puncture your aorta, you can exsanguinate, lose all of your blood volume in 15 seconds. It does not take long. So an injury to the aorta is extremely dangerous. Unless you're literally in surgery as you're having your aorta injured, it's usually fatal. Be very lucky if you survived an aortic injury. And you can see there's 3 blood vessels, 3 big blood vessels coming off the top of the aorta. You can imagine where these go. You have 3 real places that you can send blood. The middle one goes to your head. The one on the right side, I'm having trouble talking today. The one on the right-hand side goes to your right arm, and the one on the left-hand side goes to your left arm. So, 3 main routes that you can send the blood. And then you can see also that it loops around this way, and it loops around because it's also got to send blood. There, it continues on the back here to the lower half of your body. So that branches out and goes to your organs and all over the place. Question?
What are these lines called?
What's that, sorry?
What's the lines called that send it to?
What are the lungs called?
Like the lines, like the one that send it to your head and stuff.
What are the names of those arteries? The one that goes to the right side is called the right brachial artery. The one that goes to the left side is called the left brachial artery. And the one that goes to the head is called the carotid artery.
You don't have to write that.
You don't need to know that stuff. No, this isn't like a full body anatomy course. We're just going to focus just on the heart.
So,
Yeah. If you ever want to take that course, I highly recommend it. It's a great course. I think they teach it in phys ed, don't they? There's an anatomy course in phys ed.
Yeah, okay.
There is a bit? I thought there was. I could be wrong. But they do all the muscles and bones and stuff like that if you're interested in all the other stuff. There's also, a great first-year course you could take in college and university that would cover all of human anatomy. So it's a tough course for memorization, though. That I would say in all the courses I took in university, that was probably the course that had the most words. It's pretty much every day learn 50 new words because it's just like, what are the names of all the muscles in your arm? What are the names of all the bones? What are the names of... So it's a little bit intense for vocabulary, but it's kind of cool. Anyway, so that's the heart, okay? Remember that the right side of the heart, everything in purple here, is devoted to pumping deoxygenated blood to the lungs, and everything on the left side of the heart, which is on your right, is dedicated to pumping blood to the rest of the body, and it's oxygenated blood on this side. You guys ready to take a look at an actual heart? Question?
Yeah, so each time your heart beats, that's the valves opening and closing, right?
Just the closing. The opening is nice and silent. So it's coordinated. So both of your atriums contract first, and then the blood falls back against the AV valves. That's the lub, the first part of the heartbeat. Then your ventricles contract and the blood goes out into the arteries and falls back on the bicuspid and the tricuspid. That when they snap shut, that's the dub.
Oh, okay.
So it's lub dub, lub dub, lub dub. It's the outside valves and the inside valves closing. Lub dub, lub dub, lub dub, lub dub. So the actual contracting of the heart muscle tissue doesn't make a sound, so you can't actually hear the contractions, but you can hear the blood falling back on the valves. All right, let's take a look at a real heart, guys. Let me get set up real quick here. I think I'm gonna do it on my desk, so I'll move this stuff off my desk. Hopefully I don't mess my feet up here. I also don't want to get a bunch of gross heart on my on my computer or anything here, so. What's that?
Can I play some Michael Myers theme to make it more intense?
Probably not gonna do that. Although, I suppose it is Halloween sort of theme. That's no better time to do a dissection than Halloween, really. I feel like it's like a Halloween themed activity. Body disassembly.
How do people, like, you know, the heart for Valentine's Day was like, you know, the shape of
The
heart?
shape, yeah, the
How
shape.
did they find, why would they do that, not like a real heart?
That is a really interesting question.
It looks nothing like a real heart.
The origin of the heart shape that we use now is like it's an ancient Roman symbol, and it's not well known what the origin of it is. And you're right, it looks nothing like a real heart. So I've heard a number of theories about where that shape comes from, but the one that I think makes the most sense is that there was a plant that Romans used to use for a contraceptive. And the flowers of the plant have that shape. And it's possible that that was associated with love, the shape of that contraceptive plant. And so that may have become the heart shape. But I don't think it's known for sure where the origin of it is. That's a really good question, because it looks nothing like a heart. Okay. This is the first time I'm using this gizmo thing here, so
Should be simple.
it should be. Woo! Also trying not to spill any of this gross stuff here. All right, iPad, it's time. I don't think this was designed for my model of iPad, but
Maybe take the case.
I could take the case up. I think it'll work. It's gonna work. Just take my pencil off here. Okay. I just gotta get the focus to work. Oh, that's pretty good. That's actually really good. Oh, really? This is better than last time for sure. Okay, awesome. Is that upside down for you? I guess it doesn't really matter.
Oh, yeah, that's no.
Okay, cool. Just turn the camera over here. This maybe? So the battery doesn't die. All right. I'm gonna need gloves. Brody, I am gonna get people to help me with the cutting tomorrow. There's not too much cutting happening here, but with the pig, if you wanna get in there, yeah. If anyone else is interested in making some pig bites, you're welcome to give her a shot. We've got quite a few systems to examine in the pig, so, oh, I just broke the glove.
Splash, so with the baby pig, do they drain all the blood first?
They pump a plasticizer into the blood vessels.
Oh.
So the veins are pumped full of blue plastic, also confusing students as to the color of venous blood. But they pump blue plastic into the veins and they pump red plastic into the arteries. Oh, I wish I would have done this when I did this with my other class. This actually works way better. I actually had my webcam positioned on top, but the focus was horrible. It was out of focus the entire time. This is much better. Somebody in the other class recommended this stand.
How bad is the smell?
Not terrible.
The smell is not terrible.
It smells like formalin, which is a preservative, but it's not as bad as formaldehyde.
Oh, okay.
So formaldehyde is really bad. So it used to be preserved in formaldehyde, but we don't use that anymore. Okay, there's a heart. There it is. That's what they look like. Let's see what's here afterwards. I just don't want to spill all over the floor. Okay, so first of all, let's take a look at the external anatomy of this thing. So I want to arrange it exactly the way that it is in your notes, which is like... figure out which side is right and left here. Got like this. There we go. So this is the way that you would see it in your notes. We've got right ventricle right here, left ventricle here, which goes all the way down to the apex of the heart, which is just like the point at the bottom of the heart. And then the atrium, which you're like, well, where are the atrium? There are these tiny little things on top. Okay, there's really not much to them. They're extremely thin, and this is the atrium. In the diagram, the atrium look like they're almost as substantial as the ventricles, but they're really not at all. They are just like tiny, tiny little pockets on top of the heart. And keep in mind that their job is just to fill this part so this part can pump properly. That's really all that they do. And the same thing on this side. Here's the atrium over here. It's just like a tiny little flap on top. So what I'm going to do is cut the heart exactly the way it is in the diagram, cut it like this so that you guys can see all the internal structures. But before I do that, I just wanted to mention that there are these blood vessels on the outside right here. There's one right here. There's one descending right here. Those are called the coronary arteries, and their job is to actually feed the heart muscle tissue with blood. So there is a bunch of blood going through the heart, but that blood isn't actually feeding the heart muscle tissue with oxygen. In order to feed the heart muscle tissue with oxygen, you need a separate system that is actually going to go through all of that heart muscle tissue, and that's these coronary arteries. There's actually one that the circumflex, which goes around the other side, and you can see it coming around on the other side right here, down here. So that's a circumflex artery. That's the one that feeds the back of the heart. So when we talk about somebody having a heart attack, that is, they're having a blockage of their arteries in their heart, it's these arteries that are getting blocked. And if somebody is having a bypass surgery, they're actually having a vein attached high up here on the coronary arteries and bypassing, going around a blockage in the artery to another location. And you can have a triple or a quadruple bypass or a quintuple bypass. That's just how many bypasses they're adding, depending on how clogged your artery potentially is. So I just wanted to mention that because you won't be able to see these very well once I cut open the heart. Okay, let's go in. Let's enter. Make sure not to cut myself here. This thing is quite sharp. Come on. Sorry. Okay. Just going to cut through a little bit of the septum and stuff in the middle. All right. So there it is right there. So this is essentially exactly what you see in the diagram. I can't tell. Is the video oriented like this? Okay. Sorry. Then I'll flip it this way to make it a little easier for you to see. So I'll go through my probe here. So with my probe. So the inferior vena cava would be right here, the lower big vein, and the superior vena cava would be right here in the body. They both got cut off when this thing was removed. So it's no longer attached. But both of those blood vessels would feed in, you can actually see the hole right here, into the right atrium. So this little sac at the top, just this little area right here, it doesn't really look like much, is the right atrium. This is actually blood. A little bit of blood left over in there, that's just congealed blood. And so then it would get pumped down through the valve into this little cavity down here. So this is the right ventricle in here. And you can see that how thick the tissue is right here in comparison to the atrium. So the atrium is like, I don't know, what would you say, 3 millimeters thick? Not very thick. But if you look at the right ventricle, that's pretty thick. I mean, at its thinnest down here, maybe it's 5 mils, but here maybe it's 1-ish centimeters or a little bit less than 1 centimeter. So it's fairly thick. And in between, let me use my forceps here so you can see it, but here in between is the valve that I was talking about. So this meaty thing right here is the AV valve, and that's going to prevent blood from going backwards up into the atrium. And these little strings inside, I can bring these around for the people in the classroom, these are the heart strings. These little strings, so the chordae tendineae. So they keep that blood, that thing from prolapsing. There they are right there. Now, I think, can I bore you for 1 second? That little 1 times thing right there, can you tap that? I think if you tap that 1 times, it'll engage the better lens. Oh, is there a 2 times? Tap it again. Just 1 and 0.5, eh? No 2. Well, that's disappointing, but thank you for trying. I was hoping to get some more magnification. I do think I can put this on. Oh man, do I ever not want to touch my iPad with this? Gross hands. Like, what happens if I do this? I gotta hold it up like this. Oh, it does work if you bring it close, though. Cool. So actually, if you look real close at this side here, you can actually see the muscle fibers in the heart tissue. So those are the muscle fibers, and they get shorter. Those little fibers in there get shorter when the heart muscle contracts, and that's what actually makes it contract. If I open this up, you're able to see the valve a little bit better. So those are the little heart strings on the side there. These little strings. And then there's the chamber of the heart, of the ventricle right there. Oh, that's cool. You can actually see the fibers, muscle fibers. That's cool. Okay, so this thing is gonna, I'll get that out of the way. So the right ventricle is gonna contract. It's gonna push blood up and out. It actually goes out the top of the heart through here. So this got cut off the top, but right here is where you would find the pulmonary artery. So this is going to go to the lungs. So blood goes out this hole, out to the lungs, gets oxygen, circles back, and comes back in through the pulmonary veins. The pulmonary veins are both cut off. Unfortunately, it would be cool if everything was still attached to this thing. And it comes in right through. You can actually see the little hole right here where it was attached. This is the hole. And so it would come in through here and into the atrium. this all the way through. Come on, atrium. There we go. Okay, and it would go into the atrium right there. Okay, the atrium fills up. The atrium's actually mostly cut off here, but it's right up here. And then when that contracts, it's going to push blood down into the real beefy part here on the left side. So this is the left ventricle. You can see that the heart strings on here are actually much thicker on this side, and that's because it's under a lot more pressure. So if you didn't have really thick little chordae tendineae here holding this valve, the valve would actually get blown out because there's so much pressure on this side. Again, it's like 3 psi pressure, same as in like a football that's pumped up properly. So it's a lot of pressure. If you look at how thick this is, that is a thick muscle right there. So I'll bring it a little bit closer here. This is 2.5 centimeters wide. That's a lot of muscle tissue. So this is where the majority of your muscle tissue lies, because its job is to pump through the entire body. So when this thing pumps, it's going to force blood up and through. Oh, it's actually kind of sad. I think the aorta got trimmed off here. I didn't trim it off, but it would be right here. So the blood comes out the top of the heart through a really thick blood vessel at the top here. That's the aorta. And then that's where it's going to get distributed out to the various organs. Left arm, right arm, head. And then there's a vessel that circles around back and comes out the bottom here. And that one pumps to the rest of the organs on the body. So there it is. This is approximately the size of a human heart. This would be, like I said, a small human. If you were maybe 5'2" or something like that, this is approximately the size of your heart. If you're 6 feet tall, a larger human, your heart would maybe be about 30% bigger than this. So the average person's heart is a little bit bigger than this, but if you're a smaller person, this is probably around the size of your heart. Questions before we move on here? That's the heart, folks. So yours looks exactly like that. It's so similar that we can transplant stuff between humans and pigs. So it really is exactly the same. When we do the fetal pig tomorrow, you'll see that the organs inside the fetal pig are basically exactly the same as an adult human. There's almost no difference at all. So it's kind of cool. All right, I'll put this away. And then let's.
I do have a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
The pig, is the brain still attached?
To the fetal pig, yeah.
Oh, really?
Absolutely, the whole pig is there.
Huh.
Yep. We can try to do the brain. The brain's tough.
Because
The skull.
Did they liquefy the skull or try?
No. I mean, it's thin because it's a fetal pig, but it's not that thin. So oftentimes, by the time you remove the skull, you've kind of mushed the brain up in the attempt to cut it. So it doesn't work really well. You can see it, but it's certainly not what you're hoping for. I'll tell you that. Every time I do it, it's a little bit disappointing. Apologies in advance. This is the actual stinky part. This is where I put the heart into the waste bucket. It doesn't smell nice, guys. Sorry about that.
Got him back here.
You can smell from back there?
No, something got him
I
back
can
here.
feel
Oh,
that blood over here.
It's gross, guys. Apologies. Try not to look in the bucket. I think you'll have a bad day. A lot of gross stuff going on here. Several pigs and several hearts. Yeah, it's gross.
Oh.
Yep, you can. They only pick up the waste from this stuff usually once a semester. So sitting around for a little while. What's that, sir?
I said, what do you guys do with it when it's showed up?
We have a waste disposal company come and pick them up. We used to just put them in the garbage.
Oh, wow,
We were told by the company that produces them that there's nothing toxic, really, in the products. So we were told that you can just dispose of them in the normal garbage, but this school decided that that was not cool. So we don't do that anymore. The company says we can.
Where does the company keep the pig in?
They incinerate them.
Oh.
Yeah. So most of this waste goes to an incinerator.
research sheet, the template, and then the link to the, where we do our presentation, and then plus suspension.
I tried to keep it consistent for every project, so people aren't like, what do I have to do for this? What do I do? It's very consistent from project to project, so everybody's very clear on what the expectations are. It's such a quick turnaround, so if I'm always changing what the projects are like every single day, like people will start getting confused, and then I'll get all kinds of stuff. So I'm trying to keep everything very consistent. Hi guys, welcome back. If you are tuning in here, if you wouldn't mind letting me know in the chat that you are here again, that would be awesome. For the second half, I got to take attendance in the first half and the second half. So just let me know if you're here. Hopefully there's people are here. Tony's here. It says there's 7. Okay, that's good. Good, yeah, let me know if you're here. If you're signed into a different account, something I wouldn't recognize, then if you wouldn't mind using your school account, that would be awesome.
But it might not be because people in our class, because anyone that has YouTube can watch.
True. If if you're not in our class and you're watching this, I'm shocked. I'm shocked that you are.
Some people do.
Hey, sure, nothing wrong with that.
Wait, are we doing this part?
What's that? That's what we're going to talk about right now. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about blood vessels, and then we're going to talk about some illnesses of the circulatory system, and then we are going to start the project. So you'll probably have an hour to work on the project today. That's the objective. I'm just going to take attendance here quick. Theo, I noticed an email from you asking about your assignments. I will email you back. I didn't get a chance to email you back over lunch, but there's at least one assignment where I think you handed in the wrong sheet by accident. And I'll let you know what it is. I'll send you an email, but I think it's just a mistake. And there may be others. I got to double check. Who else is here? Micah. And we didn't lose anyone from the room, did we? I don't think so. Okay. All right. So in the second half, we looked at the heart this morning. Right now, we're going to take a moment to take a look at the blood vessels. So that's the other component that we haven't discussed. We talked about the blood and what's in it. We talked about the heart and the parts of the heart and what they do. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the blood vessels. So just wait till this pops up for you guys. Is it working? Good. There are 3 main types of blood vessels, and they are structurally different because they have to do different jobs. So the main ones, there's the arteries and arterioles. So those are the high pressure vessels. They're kind of the same thing, and arteriole is just kind of like a slightly smaller artery. There's the capillaries, or capillaries, depending on who you ask, which are the teeny tiny vessels that allow for gas and material exchange. So they're only 1 cell thick, they're teeny tiny ones. And then on the other end of the system, you got the collection vessels that are going to pick up all the blood that's lost all of its oxygen and bring it back to the heart again. And those are the veins and the venules. So those are the low pressure ones. Chances are, if you've ever seen a blood vessel, like from the surface of your skin, what you're actually seeing is a vein. So they run close to the surface. It makes sense from an evolutionary perspective that we've evolved to have our low pressure vessels near the outside and our high pressure vessels towards the middle of our limbs and trunk. Mostly because if you puncture the high pressure vessels, the arteries could potentially die. Whereas if you're puncturing your veins, which are closer to the outside, usually if you're applying even a little bit of pressure, that's probably going to be self-healing. So it does make sense that they would be towards the outside and the ones that you can see. There are a couple places on the body where your arteries actually do run close to the surface. In fact, let me pull that up real quick here. You've heard of these before probably because these are the places on your body where you can take your pulse, where you can feel your pulse. I was actually just looking at a lesson that my partner was teaching at the medical school about this exact thing. And I should have just grabbed her diagram that she used in her lesson because it was a good one. Okay, this is maybe the wrong search term. Maybe I want to look for pulse locations. There we go. Okay, so these are the areas. That's blurry as heck. Is there a better one down here? This one's pretty good. So these are some areas where you have arteries that are running pretty close to the surface of the skin, maybe a couple millimeters below the surface of the skin. So if you place 2 fingers onto these locations, carotid, you can feel the pulse of blood going through that high pressure vessel. If you can't, maybe move your 2 fingers around a little bit, you should be able to feel it. You can find it in the brachial area, which is the little diamond. That's when you open up your arm, it's like the little diamond area right here. This one is a little bit deeper, so it's a little harder to feel this one. I don't use this one clinically very often because it's a little bit on the deep side, so it's a little harder to feel. That's where your brachial artery is running. If you look on the thumb side of your hand, right, you've got these tendons that are right below your wrist right here. If you just go just to the thumb side of those tendons and push down, there's sort of like a little groove underneath here, right here. If you put your finger in there, there you go, you can feel your radial artery.
No.
You can't feel it?
Oh, wait, yeah.
Should be able to feel it.
You just have to move it.
I can feel mine. Might have to push a little bit. Yep, alveolar. Okay, so there's radial artery. There's the ulnar artery on the other side. That one's a little bit deeper and a little bit harder to feel, so it's not usually used clinically. You can, if you dig around, you can find this one too, but it's a little bit deeper. There's a femoral artery, which is just inside of your thigh, below your hip. There's one on the back of your knee. That's your popliteal artery. This one's a fairly deep too. There's quite a bit of tissue in between there, so this one's a little bit harder to feel. And then the dorsalis pedis is the one on the toe. This one is a little bit easier to feel, so this one is used fairly often clinically, and so is the posterior tibial artery. Yep, in these locations, these are places where the arteries run fairly close to the surface, and you can usually feel your pulse in these locations.
Teachers and me, for me, personally, it's very hard for me to find it.
In some of these locations, it's actually fairly deep. So
But even for here,
really, even for your carotid one, oh, that one you should be able to find. You might be putting your finger in the wrong spot.
no, even though when the teacher was doing it for Jeff, because we had to take a few tests, she had to take her a really long time to find the
True.
cloth.
Interesting. This one I can feel immediately. So like this, I would say this one is probably the closest to the surface of all of them. You're basically putting your finger right on it. So yeah, this one I can feel really strong. But anyway, other than these few locations, your arteries are running pretty deep. So they're pretty much next to the bone and pretty far away from the surface. So you're not going to have too much contact with your arteries from the outside. So what makes an artery special? Let's zoom in on this little piece of artery right here. Remember that these are the vessels that are going away from the heart. So the most important thing about them is that because they're right after the pump, is if you can imagine like a water pump or something like that with a hose attached to it, this is going to be a place in the hose where the pressure is very high. You're right next to the pump. Okay, so one important thing about these is that they are high pressure. Because they're under high pressure, they are thick. We say thick and strong. As you can imagine, if it's holding 3 psi of pressure, the same as a football, yeah, they got to be pretty thick vessels. If they're weak, they're just going to rupture under the pressure. So they got to be pretty strong. And the really impressive and special thing about them is that they have a ton of muscle in them. So if you look at a cross section here, there is a really big cross-sectional area around the outside of the artery that is muscle. And that is so cool because it allows your arteries basically to choose where the blood goes. So if you need more blood to your stomach, you can relax the arteries and they will open up, they will vasodilate, and more blood will go to your stomach. If you want less blood going to your stomach, let's say it's an emergency, you got to fight or flight, you got to run from a bear, you're going to close the arteries that go to your internal organs because you don't need that functionality, and you're going to open up the arteries that go to your muscles because you need those. So you can redirect blood to the various parts of your body to whatever you need. And this is a really essential function of arteries. You have to redirect blood flow depending on what part of your body you need at any given time. So I just add that in there here too. So thick and strong and able to constrict and relax. To direct blood flow. When you're young, usually, I mean, barring the fact that you may have some type of genetic illness or defect with your arteries, you're very good at doing this. Stand up. Immediately, your blood vessels are going to constrict in your legs to redirect blood to your brain so that you do not become unconscious when you stand up. Because there's a pressure difference, right? All of a sudden, you have to increase the amount of pressure it takes to pump blood to your head. Your head is higher, so you have to pump harder. Your heart doesn't pump harder, but your blood vessels constrict to ensure that the blood goes up to your brain. If you've ever been kneeling over or crouched down for a long period of time and suddenly stood up, the reason why you see stars and like things go dark is because it's taking a moment for your blood vessels to constrict and increase the blood pressure to your brain. So your brain is starved of oxygen for a few seconds and you start to lose consciousness. So when you're older, this gets amplified by a lot. So like you guys probably have not experienced that yet. But when you get older, that's much worse. That tends to get much worse because your tone, your muscle tone in your arteries tends to decrease with age. And especially if you don't take care of your circulatory system, we're going to talk about some illnesses of the circulatory system. But if you start to get hardening of your arteries, which to some extent happens to everybody as they get older, but certainly depending on diet and exercise can be very bad. If you start to get a lot of hardening of your arteries, you basically can't do that at all. And so then you really, really start having problems controlling redirection of blood. And you get vasovagal is what it's called when you can't pump enough blood to your brain and you start increasing the amount of problems that you have with that as you age. So anyway, but that's a really essential function of blood vessels. They have to be able to, for arteries specifically, they need to be able to redirect blood flow with that muscle. So that's arteries, things leaving the heart, okay? And you have a main branch of these that runs pretty much everywhere. I don't know if I showed you a picture of that. I want to actually show you where the arteries run. Oh boy, that is some of the worst spelling I've ever seen. Systemic arteries. There we go. So there's the main ones. So those would be arteries and arterioles, which are the slightly smaller ones. In the middle, those arterioles branch into teeny, teeny, tiny little vessels. Do I actually have a picture of one on here? I don't. Oh, I meant to put a picture. Anyway, they're in the middle. So they're in between arteries and veins. They're little tiny vessels right here. And these vessels are only 1 cell thick. So if you look at the artery, you can see like there's a lot of cells here, right? Like there's a layer of muscle cells, a layer of epithelial cells, then another layer of epithelial cells in the middle. They're thick, right? These are multi-cell big things. But the capillaries are only one cell thick. So if you were to actually look at this tube, you'd see that the tube is made out of single cells all the way around. And the reason they have to be so thin is because, so this is the tube, you can actually see the cells of the tube if you look at a capillary. Put some nuclei in there. So the reason they have to be so thin is because they have to allow stuff to get out of the tube and get into the tube. That's the whole point. This is like, these are the drop-off locations. So you're going to be dropping off O2, and you're going to be picking up CO2, right? You're going to be picking up waste gas from the cells, the CO2 that they make. You're going to be taking up waste products, and you're going to be dropping off nutrients. So because all the exchange is happening at this juncture here, they have to be very thin. And it's actually so small that when you send red blood cells through, they have to go through one at a time. So your red blood cells are literally just, oh, why is this going so slow? Every once in a while, this thing starts giving me a hard time. Let's try this. There we go. So the red blood cells actually have to go through one at a time. So this is an erythrocyte here, or a red blood cell. I used to show a video of this. Maybe I can link the documentary. I don't want to give you too much stuff to do. Like it's like a 45-minute documentary, but it's really cool because it does, maybe I'll just post it for anybody that's interested, but it shows some really good visualizations, actual photos of red blood cells traveling through capillaries. It's really cool. You can see them lined up one at a time going through the blood vessels. It's kind of cool. Anyway, so they're, let me just, I'll put it off to the side here. So this is one cell thick. For exchange of material. So they are connected to the arteries, or to the arterioles, and to the venules. So they have high pressure coming in on one end, and then they just flow out to the low pressure side on the other end. These are the same vessels, by the way, that go around all of your alveoli in your lungs. So again, they're used for exchange. So this is where the oxygen would go into your blood and the CO2 would go out of your blood in the lung at a capillary. And these ones you cut all the time. So even just bumping your arms off of things, just like in your everyday motions and things, you rupture these. They break. They're only one cell thick. And most of the time you don't even get a bruise. So this gets patched over very quickly by your platelets and stuff like that, and you hardly get anything. If you have a problem with clotting, though, if you have an illness where your clotting doesn't work very well, you may get bruises just from everyday contact, bumping into a door or, just walking around. So people get bruises just for nothing. So depending on how well your clotting mechanism works. Okay, and then on the other side, so we've got this network of capillaries, and they start to come together into collection vessels called venules, and then really big collection vessels on the end here, and those are the veins. So you'll notice if you were to compare the artery to the vein, the artery's got this big, thick, muscular wall. Well, the vein hardly has any. So if you look at them, there is a little bit of muscle in the veins, but realistically they don't do very much. So veins don't really have a muscular layer. It's there, but it's not very effective because it's very thin. So they don't really have the ability to constrict or relax. Not really. A little bit. But they're not really directing blood flow in the same way. They also don't have to be very thick. So if you look at the connective tissue layer in the artery, it's pretty thick. It's like 30 or 40 cells thick. And in the vein, it's maybe like 3 to 5 cells thick. Because again, it's not under high pressure. You don't want them to leak, but you also don't need them to be super thick because they're not under high pressure. So if you've ever had blood taken from a vein before, you guys have probably given blood at some point, maybe for a blood test or something, maybe you haven't. But it doesn't just come launching out of there when you poke it. When you poke it, it fills the container, but it's like a gentle flow that fills the container. That's the kind of pressure that it's under, a very, very low pressure. Enough to keep the blood moving, but it's not enough to like fly out of the thing. So it's under fairly low pressure. So there's one more structural feature that veins have to have because of that. Because they have very low pressure, especially in your legs, imagine that you've got to get blood from the bottom of your feet back up to your heart again. And there's not a lot of pressure and it's working against gravity. So in order to prevent the blood from flowing backwards, your veins have a series of valves built into them. So they actually are all along the vein. So whenever blood has sufficient pressure to move up, it goes up, but then if for some reason due to position or whatever, there is less pressure, instead of falling all the way back down to your feet again, it only falls a little way down into the valve. And so this always keeps blood moving in a single direction in your veins. If you're sitting for a really long time, which we have a tendency to do in here, unfortunately, or if you're on an airplane or a train or something like that, oftentimes, especially for older people, they get people to stand up and move around. Because the blood can actually flow so slowly through these vessels that you can start getting clots building. Blood will just start clotting in the vein, and then you can do something like a heart attack. So, so in general, it's good not to be sitting for extended periods. Question?
What happens when your feet falls asleep?
That has nothing to do with blood flow.
Oh, it's the nerve.
It's just nerve, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So you impinge the nerve and you prevent nerve conduction coming back from your foot, and then once you relieve the nerve impingement, at first there's no feeling because the nerve is no longer functioning. It's not transmitting the signal to your brain. But slowly, one nerve fiber at a time, it'll start firing again. And then you get that's the pins and needles sensation, which is basically random nerves firing until it starts functioning properly again. Yeah, it's a really weird feeling. Anyway, let me write all this stuff down. So for veins, beings. So they're much thinner than arteries, low pressure, you can't see that? Much thinner than arteries, low pressure blood, and valves to prevent backflow. I mentioned earlier that you can have a bypass in your heart. Sorry. You can have a bypass in your heart. What they do when they give you a bypass is they actually remove a vein from your leg, one that's not terribly important, and they use that to make an artery at your heart. And you might think, well, those are completely different. They have valves, they're very thin, they're not thick enough to be an artery. True. But if you leave a vein under high pressure for an extended period, your body actually converts it into an artery, which is really crazy. So it'll start building muscle layer around the outside in the muscle band. It'll increase the thickness of the connective tissue. It converts it into an artery over time, which is insane. But that's what it does. So it becomes an artery in your heart. So amazing. A lot of crazy physiology stuff. Question?
So the one cell there. So
For these guys, yeah.
Yeah, for the red blood cells.
Mhm.
How fast do they move along?
How fast do they move along? You know what? Let me find a video.
They just go one at a time.
It is. It's literally just single file. The red blood cells move through. But maybe I can find a quick video. Give me 1 sec. Let's see if we can find it. Oh. Often,
Are you searching for adventure? Do you want to travel through time? Are you always
so that is, there we go. That's a capillary. What you were just looking at there was an arterial. So there, you can see it running through right there. And so you can see that there's periods where it goes a little faster and periods there where it goes a little bit slower. That's in sequence with the heart beating. So during a contraction of the left ventricle, there's like a boost in pressure and it goes a little faster and then it slows down while the heart's at rest, speeds up, slows down. But you can actually see them traveling through one at a time. It's kind of cool. There they go. And you can actually see the shape of the red blood cells. That's cool. That's a good video. Cool. Any other questions about this before we move on? There were some questions here at the bottom. Don't worry about these questions, okay? We do not have time for these, so you can totally ignore them. I've X'd them out on my copy, but I meant to remove them yesterday when I was looking over this note because I was like, oh, we don't have time for this. But okay, what we're going to do right now is I'll try and go through this fairly quickly here. We're going to take a look at some circulatory system disorders. So just like previous, we're more or less going to be looking at the causes, symptoms, and treatments for these. Although I have sort of organized the note a little bit more straightforward in terms of instead of just having empty blocks, I've made it pretty much an exact fill in the blank from the presentation. So this should be a little bit easier to pick out what I'm looking for here, but okay, let's get to it. So you're going to use this, and I'm going to use my version of this. Where are you? Excuse me. Anatomy of mammals. That work? No. Oh, there it goes. Okay, so we mentioned that the circulatory system has three components: blood, blood vessels, and heart. So these are illnesses of one of those, okay? So if these things are not functioning properly, those are illnesses of the circulatory system. Yeah, and lots of things can potentially go wrong. So let's start by talking about heart murmurs. Murmurs are when you listen to the heart and there's extra sounds. So you guys probably already know what the heart is supposed to sound like. Lub-dub, 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 lub-dub. If it doesn't sound like that, that's a heart murmur, okay? So if there's extra sounds, like lub-dub, 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 the extra is not supposed to be in there. So if you hear a in between, it means that there's blood sliding backwards past one of the valves. So that is pretty much the cause of a heart murmur. It's usually because of leaky valves. Sometimes it's because there's actually a hole in between the two ventricles in the septum. So that's a fairly common cause as well. That's usually a congenital defect, so people are born with that. You, when you're in the womb, have a hole there. There's a passage in between the two because you don't have to pump blood to your lungs before you're born because your lungs don't do anything, right? Like you're not breathing in there. So your lungs are actually functionless while you're still in the womb. So pretty much right after birth, that hole seals up usually and then grows into your septum. And then after that point, you should never have a hole there anymore because you don't skip the lungs anymore. But some people, the hole doesn't heal completely and then you end up with a hole in your septum. So that is possible to have that. And it also causes an extra sound during the heartbeat, which is a heart murmur. Okay, and then you can rate them on a grade from 1 to 6 based on how audible they are. Really, really minor heart murmurs, I think usually require no treatment. But if you have a very significant heart murmur, then you may require a valve replacement or some other thing, some other surgery. Question?
So, as of turbulent blood flow caused by?
It's what, sorry?
What would be the two last blanks?
Extra heart sounds as a result of
Turbulent?
sorry, I'm gonna make sure I get this. As a result of turbulent blood flow.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's blood flow that caused by?
That's right. Turbulent blood flow. I think I highlighted the words that are supposed to go in there, but I tried to anyway. So you either got a leaky valve or you've got a hole in your septum. This is probably the one. Oh, question? Yeah?
Yeah, can you feel it, like the heart murmur?
No.
No?
So remember, what you're feeling is the valve snapping shut, right?
Right.
So that is not really affected. It's possible, I guess, if you had a really severe murmur, a lot of backflow, that you may be able to feel less distinct lub dubs with your fingers, but I don't think it's palpable. At least that's not a clinical way to find out if somebody has a heart murmur. So I would say it's probably not a good way to find it. So an MI, a myocardial infarction, is a heart attack. This is, like I said, this is probably the one that you're the most familiar with. People talk about heart attacks all the time. They're very common. And this is when you interrupt the blood supply that is going to the heart. So we talked previously about these coronary arteries, these blood vessels right here that run along the surface of the heart. We actually looked at them in the heart dissection. And an MI happens when you plug them. So a blood clot usually travels to one of those vessels, and it's usually precipitated by the fact that you already have plaque buildup in those vessels. So if you've got some buildup of plaques, which we're going to talk about later here in the vessels, then it really doesn't take that big of a blood clot to clog them. If you have healthy arteries in your heart, in your coronary arteries, usually it's not thin enough to be blocked by a blood clot. So it's certainly, you're a lot less likely to have a heart attack if you have healthy blood vessels in your heart. That's the main thing that's happening as you're getting older. You know you're having a heart attack when you feel some chest pain, shortness of breath, nausea is often accompanying it. By the way, you don't always have all these symptoms. Some people actually have very minor symptoms from a heart attack. People sweat, they feel anxiety. Sometimes people call that anxiety a sense of impending doom. That's what they use in medical textbooks all the time. You feel like something is wrong or something bad is happening. That's the kind of anxiety that people feel. I should mention, before anybody panics here, that these are extremely rare for young people to get an MI. It is physically possible, but like I said, you normally need to have that cumulative plaque growth in your coronary arteries to be susceptible to an MI. So it's extremely rare for young people. I suppose it is physically possible. And as mentioned here, it's usually a blockage of a coronary artery. When you have a bypass operation, what you're doing is really something preventative to prevent an MI. You're creating a side passage for blood to go around a really thin part of your coronary arteries so that hopefully you don't get a clog that is going to occlude them. If you do have an MI, you can, well, what they normally do is they give you clot busting drugs. So drugs that are going to break that clot apart in your heart. That is the frontline treatment for somebody who's having an MI. But once you clear that clot and the person is stable, you could potentially try and reverse the blockage. So as I mentioned, a bypass is the most common way to do that. However, there are other ways that you can do this as well. You can put in stents. A stent is basically a piece of metal that holds the artery open. So you put it inside and expand it outwards to hold the artery open. Sometimes stents work really well. They tend not to work that well because they get clogged themselves. So the stent often gets its own plaque growth on it, especially if you have really bad arterial sclerosis already. It tends not to be a great long-term treatment. So stenting is not as common as it used to be. Bypass surgery is much more common, but it's a very significant surgery. Bypass surgery it's open heart surgery, so there's a lot of risks associated with bypass. So they are very effective though. Really, in cardiology now, we spend a lot more time in preventative treatment and less in treatment for heart attacks and things like that. So we have much better treatments to help prevent MIs from happening in the first place. Because there are side effects associated with a lot of these treatments. We used to do a human dissection lab at the University of Guelph. We used to go there for the day and look at some of these samples. Obviously, we're not running that this year. Anyway, this is a picture from one of those human dissection labs where somebody actually had a bypass operation. I don't know if you can see it on here, but these vessels right here are not natural vessels. This and this. So these are both grafted onto the surface of the heart, which is kind of cool. So this person has had, oh yeah, and this is not a natural vessel either. So this is a triple bypass surgery. And there's somebody getting a bypass surgery. It's open heart surgery, so it's complex. The reason I put this one in is because, and this is sort of as an aside, I don't think this is on your sheet. Let me double check. Oh, it is. It is. So this is a heart-lung bypass machine. This thing right here.
Sorry, what is it called?
It's called a heart-lung machine or a heart-lung bypass machine. And what it does is while you do all of this work on the heart, you actually have to disconnect it. Because if it's connected and you've got high pressure blood moving through it, it's pretty hard to sew things together. So it would be like if you had like a high pressure air hose and you tried to cut the air hose and then stitch the air hose back together again while there was high pressure air running through it. It doesn't really work. So you kind of have to stop the flow when you're going to do any kind of surgery here. Obviously, you can't stop the flow of blood to your body or you die. So they need to reroute the blood from your body through a machine that will oxygenate the blood just like your lungs and then pump it to your body. It works for a bit. So you can use a heart-lung bypass machine for 5-6 hours while you're doing surgery. However, you don't want to do it for a really long time because if it's going through there for a really long time, you run the risk of damaging your red blood cells because they're not meant to run through artificial tubes and things like that. They get damaged. They also get damaged in the filtering mechanism here that they use to oxygenate the blood and stuff like that. It's not a perfect system. So there really is, it's a limited time. You can't really leave people in these machines forever. Yes?
What would be the blank for there's a during surgery something machine for them?
Heart-lung machine. This thing, heart-lung machine, yeah. And it does the work of the heart and lungs. Pretty well.
And that's what big machine is just for small organs.
Yeah.
That's sort of
The big bulk of it is that you have to have a large surface area to perfuse the oxygen into the blood and the CO2 out. So it actually takes a lot of, it's basically like unfolding all of the tiny vessels that are in the lungs and like making an artificial version of those. So you can get a job as somebody who operates this machine full time. It's called a perfusionist if you're interested. I believe there are college programs to become a perfusionist. It's a very high paying job, by the way. But you are literally keeping somebody alive. So it's kind of a high stakes job here.
pretty high, yeah.
Okay, so that all of that is surrounding surgery on the heart. A stroke, on the other hand, is when you get a blockage of a vessel, but this time in your brain. So a stroke is a brain-related loss of blood for perfusion. So strokes are a little bit harder to diagnose because in the heart, if you stop receiving blood to your heart, it's almost always because it is blocked. You have blocked a vessel to your heart. In the brain, there's really two mechanisms in which you can prevent blood flow. One could be a blockage, so that's called an ischemic stroke. Those are the most common. And so that works just the same way that it would work in the heart, where you have a blood clot that has moved into your brain and blocked a blood vessel into your brain. But it's also possible in the brain to have a rupture, a breakage of a blood vessel in your brain, and that's called a hemorrhagic stroke. So the reason why this is so dangerous is because the symptoms of these look exactly the same. You are preventing blood flow to an area of the brain, so something that your brain does no longer functions properly. Maybe you can't see color anymore. Maybe you are not able to speak. Maybe you can't move. Maybe you have unusual sensation. Maybe there's all kinds of things. The brain does everything, right? Yes?
Doesn't a stroke cause your face muscles to not work?
Good.
Basically droop?
That is one of the common symptoms. Yep. So if you have a stroke, a blockage in the area of your brain, your motor cortex, that controls the muscles on one side of your body, then you get a drooping. But it really depends on where the blockage is. That's a very common place to get one, and so that is often a symptom of a stroke, but there's all kinds of symptoms you can get. You could like lose your ability to identify shapes. You know, it's like anything that your brain does could potentially be cut off by a stroke. So there's all kinds of weird stuff. There are some common ones. I think I put the common ones up here, did I? We'll see. Anyway, you'll notice, by the way, that those two types of strokes are basically the opposite of each other. One is not enough blood, and the other one is too much blood. So the problem with that is you have to be very careful when treating a stroke, because if you give somebody a clot-busting drug, like you would for a heart attack, that's great if they're having a blockage, right, an ischemic stroke. But if they're having a hemorrhage, the opposite, and you give them a clot buster, then it will kill them. So, and the same thing is true of the opposite. So if you give somebody medication for a hemorrhagic stroke, that is to clot blood, and they have an ischemic stroke, a plug, it just makes the clot way worse. So you have to be really careful when treating a stroke to make sure you're treating the right thing. So it normally requires you to get a CT scan. They need to scan your brain in order to see what type of stroke that you're having before you treat it. So it's not quite as simple as a heart attack. A heart attack, they usually give you a clot buster like the moment you're in the door. Once they know you're having a heart attack, then you can pretty much medicate that right away. But a stroke is a little bit more complicated. Anyway, your brain cells can potentially die due to lack of oxygen. I think we mentioned this before the break, but your brain cells are very sensitive to low oxygen. I mean, we just talked about this. If you're kneeling down and you suddenly stand up, how long does it take before you become dizzy? 1 second? And that's how much your brain has only been deprived of oxygen for 1 second when you've done that. And you're already starting to lose function of your brain cells. It does not take long. Question?
Yeah, speaking of the brain not having enough blood and oxygen,
Mhm.
what did we do last week where the guy was in a pressurized room when the oxygen was, were they lowering it? Or
They were lowering the pressure of oxygen. That's right, yeah.
when the guy was missing the shape, that was just fun.
And that's only when you're depriving the brain like a little bit of oxygen, right? Like he wasn't in zero
Right.
oxygen. Yeah, but yeah, it is funny.
How just a little bit of deprived oxygen can just like mess with your brain.
It's crazy. Yeah, it like totally changes how your brain functions. Yeah, it's really crazy. But anyway, obviously your brain can't be without oxygen for very long. So 2-3 minutes of oxygen deprivation and you start getting significant cell death. A couple hours, and then you're starting to get profound cell death in your brain. So this stuff can be, dangerous. You have to restore blood flow as soon as possible. Oftentimes, long term, if you have minor damage, and depending on where the damage is in your brain, it causes things like paralysis. You can lose the ability to talk if it's part of like the language center of your brain or your cerebral cortex, the front part of your brain. You can lose your memory. And then potentially, obviously, your brain has a lot of vital life functions that it does, so you can die if you impair those functions. If you restore blood flow within a reasonable amount of time, oftentimes you can recover a lot of these functions. The brain is quite plastic and is able to recover often, but not always. So it depends on how bad the occlusion is and how long the occlusion is. So you can have a mild one where you get pretty much a full recovery, that does happen, or you can have a very powerful one that occludes blood to a lot of the brain. It could be potentially fatal. It is the second most common cause of death for humans. It's very common to have a stroke. If you don't spend a lot of time with older people, then maybe you don't notice this. But like I hang out with my grandma at the home, and yeah, a lot of her neighbors had a stroke. It's not uncommon. It's fairly common. Yes.
What's the first common cause of death?
I believe a heart attack is the most common. And after those two, cancer is the third most common cause of death. So, and those are primarily things that affect the elderly. So if you would have asked that same question 100 years ago, it would have been contagious illness that caused the majority of deaths. But we're very, very good at treating those now. So people very rarely die from contagious illness. It's possible, but unlikely. Anyway, leading cause of permanent disability, again, for the same reasons. And there are risk factors that contribute to this. Hypertension is high blood pressure, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And then really all the behaviors that can cause damage to your arteries make them inflexible and can cause plaque buildup. And those are things like smoking, uncontrolled diabetes, and high cholesterol. So those are the ones that potentially are going to, lack of exercise I should put on there too. So lack of exercise also has a damaging effect on your arteries. I have some images here as well so you can see what they look like. An ischemic stroke is when you get like a little blockage, and notice that there's plaque on the sides here that are making the blockage stick in there. So the plaque is usually necessary for that, which is why it's very rare for young people to have strokes, because they don't have the combination of clot and plaque. So you don't normally need both. And then this is the other type of stroke where you get a rupture. It's basically like getting a bruise in your brain, but that prevents proper blood flow, so it can cause damage. Okay, let's talk about that damage to the walls of the arteries. So there are two main things that are going to cause damage to the inside of your arteries. One is that your arteries can become hard. You can get basically calcium plaque forming on the inside of your arteries. And this is extremely common, especially with people as they age. So when you get older, no matter what, you can have an excellent diet, lots of exercise, you always get some plaque buildup. So a little bit of calcium buildup on the inside of calcium plaque is normal. There's pretty much no way to avoid it. But if you exercise regularly and you don't smoke, and you have a relatively healthy diet, you can greatly limit the amount of plaque that you get on the inside of your arteries. So lifestyle plays a huge role in how much you get. The actual degree to which you get it is very, very plastic. It totally depends on you, basically, on your behavior. So whenever you hear about oh, this is heart healthy or whatever, they're always talking about factors that can potentially cause these plaque buildups in the arteries. It's all referencing back to this. So it is made of calcium, the deposit, and it builds up over top of fatty deposits from atherosclerosis, which we're going to talk about next. So this and the next one here, atherosclerosis, are very closely linked to each other. So these calcium deposits build up on top of fatty deposits, which are caused from atherosclerosis. And overall, it causes the walls of your arteries to thicken. They become less flexible, and they become more prone to getting clogs. If you have really bad arterial sclerosis in your brachial arteries that go to your arms or in your femoral arteries that go to your legs, you can actually get tissue loss in your arms and legs due to lack of blood flow. So it actually occludes the blood flow so much that you don't have enough blood flowing through those main arteries to properly perfuse your limbs, and then you end up getting necrosis. So I have some pictures of it if you're interested. Yes? So this is the calcium. Arteriosclerosis is the calcium layer that builds up on the inside of the arteries. Okay? You get that calcium layer because of atherosclerosis. So these are directly linked together. Atherosclerosis is caused by a fatty deposit that happens underneath the epithelial lining of the artery.
Calcium not because of fat.
What's that?
So one is caused by calcium and the other is caused by fat.
Yes, they work hand in hand. Together, they cause occlusion of your arteries, and you don't usually get one without the other. These are directly linked to each other, and everything that causes atherosclerosis is also related to arteriosclerosis.
If you have one, you're likely to get the other one.
Yes, these are almost always found together. Yeah. Atherosclerosis is a fatty deposit that forms just under the epithelial lining. It happens more often when you damage the lining of your arteries. The damage is usually caused by chemical damage or chronic high blood pressure. So chemical damage is usually things often related to smoking. So a lot of the chemicals in cigarette smoke can potentially damage the lining of your artery, and it accelerates atherosclerosis. So it causes that damage to the inside of the artery. The fatty deposits themselves are precipitated by high LDL, high cholesterol in your blood. So it's a combination of high cholesterol and damage that is happening to the inside of your arteries. Lack of exercise also increases how much damage can occur to the inside of your arteries. So there's an exercise component of this as well. So when you put all those things together, you get plaque formation. So those plaques, like as I mentioned here, they're fatty deposits that are happening just under the epithelial lining. Then you have an immune response to that, which causes something similar to a scab. It's a hard cap that happens over top. It's kind of like a scab. And then over top of the scab, going back to the previous thing, then you tend to build a calcium buildup on top of the scab, which is the arterial sclerosis. So these things are linked together. Those caps that build up the scabs can also break loose, and you can get a clot that forms around the scab, which can potentially block other arteries. And that would precipitate a stroke or an MI. Or a pulmonary blockage. You can also get blockage in your lungs, which is quite painful. So I'm going to show you some pictures here. Trigger warning. This is necrotic tissue that is caused by really bad atherosclerosis. So this is basically somebody who's having not enough blood flow going to their fingertips or feet due to really bad plaque formation in their arteries, and then eventually the tissue just starts dying. So if you don't provide enough oxygen to your tissue, then eventually you start just getting cell death. There's really only one thing you can do in these cases, unfortunately, which is that you have to amputate these. So there's not too much you can do here. Question?
The hand sort of looks like they just put in coal, like they just broke it. Like, that's crazy.
It is, and it's extremely painful, unfortunately. This takes a long time to precipitate. This person didn't just like suddenly get a necrotic hand. Like this precipitated over months and months and months of poor blood flow. So there would have been signs long before it was this bad. And you know what? Depending on where you go in the world, maybe you don't have great medical care where you are, and maybe you waited a long time. And I will say that it is very difficult to treat. So if you have peripheral artery disease, which is really bad arterial and atherosclerosis in your peripheral arteries that go out to your limbs, and you can put stents in there, but honestly, it doesn't work very well. The main focus here is if you are having any kind of problem with that at all, hopefully you can reverse whatever you're doing that is causing such a bad buildup of plaque before you get to this stage, because it's extremely difficult to treat. Okay, let's talk about high blood pressure. That's hypertension. When your heart pumps, as we've already mentioned, it puts your arteries under pressure. That's how blood flows, right? But at rest, there's really a maximum pressure that you want to happen in your arteries. Okay, and it's measured in a really weird pressure measurement system called millimeters of mercury, otherwise known as mmHg. That's how blood pressure is normally measured. And 120 millimeters of mercury at rest is around the normal blood pressure that you're experiencing in your arterial system. That's the high pressure during contraction of the heart. There's also a pressure that happens during relaxation of the heart when it's not contracting, and that is usually somewhere around 80 millimeters of mercury. So if I took your blood pressure right now in your brachial artery, I put a blood pressure band around and tested how much pressure there was in that vessel, it would probably be around 120 when the heart is beating and 80 when it's at rest, which you usually just call 120 over 80. That is a normal blood pressure at rest. When you're exercising, this goes through the roof. So this could be, 250 over 95 or something like that. The diastolic doesn't go up that much, but the systolic, the high number, goes up quite a bit when you're exercising, and that's totally normal. But when you're resting, you don't want your system to be under extreme pressure while you're not doing any physical activity. So ideally, it should be somewhere around this. Okay, if you don't have it somewhere around this, So you have inflexible arteries, or they're not responding to pressure signaling, which they should be responding to. It causes damage to your arteries. They're not designed to be under high pressure all the time. So if you keep them under high pressure all the time, you start causing small nicks basically on the inside of your arteries, and small nicks on the inside of your arteries causes this, atherosclerosis. So you do have to control high blood pressure. It's usually done through medication. So there are a number of blood pressure medications that can be used to help reduce your blood pressure, and they're preventative to prevent atherosclerosis. Now, I should say that on top of those, there are lots of things that you can do to reduce your blood pressure that aren't medication, like exercise. So intense physical exercise for at least an hour a day there's lots of clinical proof to show that that has a high blood pressure reducing effect over time. I mean, that's the ideal way, right? But if you're elderly, you're having difficulty moving, oftentimes maybe high intensity exercise is not in the cards for you. And to be perfectly honest, people just don't do it. So people don't, their doctor can recommend high intensity exercise and just people don't do it. So we have to have some other option. Yes?
I know one thing where it's on TV all the time. It's like this little bike thing where it's like on the ground and like elderly can pedal on it.
Oh, interesting. So that would be one way, right? Like you can make these options available to people. Where my grandma lives, they have like water classes where you can do like exercises in a pool and stuff like that. That's cool. My grandma does that sometimes. There are ways to do it, but just people don't engage, or they don't have the availability. Some people just don't have access, and that's normal too. So there are drugs to help as well. Anyway, this is what I just mentioned here. The high pressure, the pressure during pumping, is called systolic pressure, and the relaxed pressure when you aren't pumping is called diastolic pressure. 120/80 is normal. Anything over 144/94 is considered to be hypertension. So if at rest, your systolic pressure is greater than 144, or your diastolic is greater than 94, they would say that you have hypertension. That probably requires some type of medical intervention. Shouldn't be that high. And my wife told me the other day that even if it's not that high, if it's approaching that, so oftentimes there's medical intervention that happens anyway to prevent it from getting that high. Yes? It's what, sorry? That's right, that's the same thing. Hypertension is the medical name for high blood pressure.
What's the low one?
Hypotension.
Or what would be the range for that?
Is what, sorry?
What would be the numbers for that?
Hypotension is a little bit difficult to parse out because if you have a very fit heart and very fit arteries, like you do a lot of cardiovascular exercise, low numbers here are not necessarily bad because you don't actually have to use a lot of pressure to perfuse your body because your arteries can constrict and relax at the right time to allow good blood flow without a really strong, hard pump. So if you're in excellent shape, you actually don't need to maintain a very high blood pressure to circulate your blood. So this number can become quite low before it becomes problematic. I wish I could put numbers on it for you here. Now, obviously, they can get so low that you're not perfusing your body properly any longer. That's chronic hypotension, and that does exist, but I don't know what the clinical numbers are for that before somebody has chronic hypotension. It does exist, but it's not very common.
What would be the risk for low blood pressure instead of high?
What would be the risk?
Yeah.
The risk is that you are not perfusing your brain with blood. Like you're literally not pumping blood hard enough to get it to go everywhere in your body. That's heart failure. So, I mean, it is possible for your heart to pump so gently that it no longer perfuses your body with blood any longer. That does exist. But typically, your heart, because you have the ability to increase your blood pressure fairly easily, remember, like when you exercise, your blood pressure goes way up, right? So usually, it's not a problem for it to be too low because anytime you need to increase your blood pressure, your heart will do that. You will increase the amount of pressure. It's fairly easy to increase it. But getting your baseline lower is very difficult for your body to do, especially if you're not very fit. So there's not a lot of problems on the low end, but there's a lot of problems on the high end.
Not low. Is that like low blood pressure?
Not really. Now, you do get people that, heart failure is a thing. So it is possible that your heart just simply cannot provide enough pressure to perfuse the body. So that does exist. I don't know what the clinical standard is, though, to look for that. I don't know much about that. It's certainly not nearly as common as high blood pressure. High blood pressure among the population, like over 50, is extremely common. But hypotension is not very common, unless you are literally dying from heart failure. So there are going to be other precipitating factors before you get there.
When people exercise, can't their blood pressure still be low?
Absolutely. If you're exercising, your resting blood pressure tends to go down. And so does your resting heart rate.
Didn't you just say if you exercise, it will make it go back up?
If you exercise, yeah. But we're talking about at rest.
No, but I'm saying some people who do have low blood pressure, even if they exercise, can still stay low.
Stay low while they're exercising?
Yeah.
No. Because in order to properly perfuse your muscles and everything that you need to get blood to while you're exercising, you have to increase the pressure. There's like no way around it. You have to do it. And it's not necessarily bad for your blood pressure to be high during exercise. I mean, there's a limit. It can't go too high, otherwise it starts damaging blood vessels. But it can go up quite a lot during exercise. So you're not going to, for example, you're not going to damage your kidneys from having high blood pressure from exercise. But if you have high blood pressure at rest, that means even when you're resting and you're allowing blood to go into your kidneys, you're also pushing way too much blood through your kidneys, which causes kidney damage and liver damage. So you are going to damage those organs over time if your blood pressure is too high. It would be like, what's a good example of this? It would be like if you had a super high pressure water hose and you had that coming into your house instead of the regular water pressure, okay? So when you turned your tap on, the water just high pressure came out of your sink and just like splashed up everywhere out of the sink. You get what I mean? That's too much pressure for the system. It's not meant to operate under that pressure. And so you're going to get leaks. Leaks are going to start appearing in your water system, right? It's not meant to be under that high pressure. It's basically the exact same thing happening here, but to your organs. They're not meant to be operated under high pressure all the time. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
I hope I did. Okay. Just really quickly as an aside, I don't actually think this is in your note. Stroke, atherosclerosis, arteriosclerosis, hypertension.
We have a carbon dioxide.
Carbon monoxide is next. Okay, I'm gonna just very briefly talk about this, but I wanted to mention that your heart is regulated by a part of your heart called the sinoatrial node. It is an area at the top of your right atrium that coordinates the electrical activity of your heart. And the actual beating of your heart is an electrical signal that passes through your heart. We're not going to get into the details of this in this course, but you can have problems with the electrical signal that's passing through your heart. It needs to be coordinated and continuous, one electrical signal that passes through. But sometimes things go wrong with that, and you end up getting, the signals getting separated, so you have one side contracting of the heart, then the other side, or you get just the atrium and not the ventricle, or just the ventricle and not the atrium, or one of them is twitching and the other one's beating normally, or one of them's beating normally, the other one's twitching, whatever. So there's all kinds of things that can get messed up with the electrical activity of the heart. One way to fix that is to have a pacemaker installed. A pacemaker electrically stimulates the heart to try and keep everything in sequence. Question?
That's what else my grandma had too.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. These are quite common as well if you have arrhythmias. So unusual heartbeats where things aren't coordinated properly. They work extremely well. So it's basically just provides a little electrical signal that tells the different parts of the heart when to contract. It doesn't operate all the time. It only operates once your heart gets out of sequence. So if it gets out of sequence, it'll step in and start re-coordinating the sequence of the heartbeat again, which is really cool. It'll save your life, right? I mean, if it gets really uncoordinated, it stops pumping blood. So the idea here is that it fixes the uncoordinated beat so that you don't stop pumping blood. Here's an example of somebody that has one right below the surface. These are really cool. You used to have to get them removed all the time to get your batteries replaced, but now you can actually wirelessly charge them right through your skin, which is really cool. So you could potentially put a wireless charger. It just attaches with a magnet on top of your skin, and it charges right through your skin.
Wait, how much pressure would be there?
Oh, just a little bit. It doesn't really pinch it.
Okay, I would be like just fully.
I think that would be problematic. But if anybody's ever seen like how one of these watches charges, it's exactly the same system. So you just set it down on top of the magnet and then charges it up. Kind of cool. This is on your sheet, correct? Carbon monoxide poisoning? Okay. Interesting thing about carbon monoxide poisoning is that your red blood cells, while they love to stick to oxygen, they really, really love sticking to carbon monoxide. So way, way more than they love sticking to oxygen. So that's really problematic. They're 200 times stronger. They form a 200 times stronger bond to carbon monoxide than they do to oxygen. So pretty much once you've stuck a carbon monoxide on a red blood cell, that's what it does now. It only transports that carbon monoxide around for a while. And therefore it's not transporting oxygen in your system any longer. Carbon monoxide has no smell. It is a colorless gas. So yeah, it's a little dangerous. There's no way to know that you're being exposed to it, and it completely displaces all of the oxygen in your respiratory system and does not allow the oxygen back in for usually an extended period. So you probably by law, you probably have a carbon monoxide detector in your house. I think they're required by law now. You don't think you have one? You might. Maybe you don't. You should consider getting one. You can get them at the hardware store. They are required by law, so you do have to have one in your house. You may not have one, but they are required by law. If you have a furnace or literally anything in your home that operates on gas, you should have a carbon monoxide detector. If you don't have anything that operates by burning stuff, oil or gas, then your chances of getting carbon monoxide poisoning are pretty much gone because it's a product of combustion. Do you guys remember combustion from grade 10? I don't know how much people remember from this. So combustion is like a hydrocarbon and oxygen. And when it burns incompletely, that it means there's not enough oxygen available, you get carbon dioxide and water and carbon. And for our purposes, the most important one, carbon monoxide. Okay, so pretty much anytime you're burning stuff, you're going to get a little bit of carbon monoxide produced. It's produced in the exhaust from your car. Question?
Yeah, I think it's stupid that carbon monoxide can basically kill you, but your body just loves it.
Your red blood cells love it. They stick to it really hard. Yeah. I mean, from an evolutionary perspective, it kind of makes sense because humans were not in contact with large amounts of carbon monoxide in an enclosed space very often. So it did nothing basically. Yes.
Is there treatments for this?
Is it what, sorry?
Is there treatment?
So the treatment for this is you need to place somebody in a 100% oxygen environment, either by giving them supplementary oxygen, or even better if it's available, a hyperbaric oxygen chamber. So a hyperbaric oxygen chamber is like a big capsule that they fill with oxygen and then they pressurize the oxygen.
That would help you?
It does, yeah. So it helps displace the carbon monoxide out of your blood if you have really severe carbon monoxide poisoning. A hyperbaric chamber is not very common. We don't have one at the hospital here, I don't think, because they're usually used to treat diving injuries. That's the most common use for a hyperbaric chamber. They're very large and expensive. Yes, so it's used to treat the bends, if you ever get the bends. But they have one like in Toronto. I would say if you had severe carbon monoxide poisoning here, they would probably airlift you to Toronto for hyperbaric treatment. So it does exist. Carbon monoxide poisoning is not super common, but it does happen. And the problem with it is once you're exposed to CO, even if you get out, get some fresh air, that CO still stays bound to your blood for a long time. So you could potentially still drown, essentially, like the next day or days later, because you're still not perfusing your body with enough oxygen, and you still have the CO attached to your red blood cells. So the treatment is usually required here. Yes.
Is there symptoms?
Yeah. Sleepiness is like the first one. If you're asleep when this happens in your house, you're kind of out of luck. That's why a carbon monoxide detector is so important, because it basically just makes you sleepy. Confusion, dizziness. It's basically like you're not getting enough oxygen to breathe. Oh, all the same symptoms that, do you remember that guy had when he went in that chamber? It's that. It looks exactly like hypoxia, low oxygen.
Because the one something that the guy had, he was like, not giggling a lot, but he thought everything was funny.
Right. You get giggly, some people get tunnel vision. It's all the same symptoms of hypoxia. Yeah.
It was funny when the guy said, "On your mask, you're gonna die," and the guy's like, "I'm gonna die."
Yeah, I was like, yeah, sure.
That was just funny.
You completely lose touch with reality, basically. But yes, so those are all symptoms of potentially of carbon monoxide poisoning. And if you can potentially give people 100% oxygen, it works fairly well. Hyperbaric chamber treatment is the gold standard. This is just mentioning really quickly here that carbon monoxide can stick to your red blood cells. When it does that, your red blood cells have a really odd purplish color, and sometimes you can detect carbon monoxide poisoning because people get purplish lips because it's actually, you can see the carbon monoxide carboxyhemoglobin, which is the complex it makes with hemoglobin in the mouth. Okay, last thing. I think this is the last thing in your sheet, right? Varicose veins. Oh boy. Varicose veins. Do you guys remember we talked about those valves in the veins to prevent blood from going backwards? So varicose veins happen when you have back pressure on those valves for a very extended period. Let's say you're standing on your feet 8 hours a day on an assembly line or something. And usually in combination with having some hormones that make your blood vessels more flexible than normal. So this can be due to genetic causes. It can happen just with age. But definitely it happens more in women, and especially after childbirth or menopause, where you tend to have more of these hormones in your blood. Question?
Yeah, I don't know if this is similar, but my brother was in Army cadets, and when they had to stand for long periods of time, he actually passed out.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Vasovagal.
We don't know why. It was like,
I think probably a lot of things could cause that. Poor venous tone. Yeah, there's probably like a whole bunch of different factors that could be involved there. But essentially, you're not perfusing your brain with oxygen. That's the end product. So interesting, though. Interesting. I don't think that would be related to this necessarily, although it may be related to poor venous return to the heart. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly. But anyway, once you have that flexibility in your blood vessels and constant back pressure, what ends up happening is your body will start to build blood vessels backwards from the valve. So what's happening is your body's trying to provide an alternate route for that blood to return to your heart. And so it starts building back vessels off of your venous system to try and connect it with some other venous return to the heart, and unsuccessfully, so it doesn't actually connect to anything. And you end up getting this, which are sort of like bulbous back vessels that are growing off of your veins. So those are called varicose veins. Much more common in females. Again, it's hormone related, but it happens in men too.
oh my god.
So they can be quite bad. Most of the time, 80-ish% of the time, it's painless. So it's just a cosmetic thing. However, some people get pain with these. It is possible to get painful varicose veins, in which case you can have them treated. So you can have them surgically removed. You can actually have them pulled out and snipped off. So it is possible to get surgery, but there are complications around the surgery. So unless they're painful, usually you don't apply treatment. There is also a newer method of treatment where they inject your varicose veins with something. I have to look into what it is exactly, but it causes them to get blocked off and shrivel up. It's some kind of chemical compound that they inject into them. And so that's an alternative treatment to surgical treatment. Yes?
Do elderly people get this?
Yes, it's very common in older people.
Oh.
And the older you are, usually your blood vessels tend to become more flexible and more prone to this as you age.
I see that a lot in legs and sometimes arms.
Right. Yeah.
Freaks me out a little.
It does happen in arms too. It's mostly legs because it requires quite a bit of back pressure, but it does happen in arms. So it is possible.
Wait, is it squishy?
It is. It's just it's like pushing on any vein, really. Questions about any of these things that we've covered? Okay. Oh, yes.
Yeah, is it possible for your veins to actually connect to another vein and have it?
As they're building sort of this back system,
Yeah.
yes, but the issue is the reason that they're doing it is maladaptive. So even if they do happen to connect, it doesn't solve the problem because that adjacent vein is experiencing the same backflow that they are. So it's because it's maladaptive. There are situations in which this is not maladaptive. For example, let's say that you have damaged a vessel in your leg due to an injury or you've had it removed. that tissue that you've removed the vessel from, it still needs to have venous return back to your heart, right? And so in that case, when it regrows a vessel and connects to the venous system, that's an adaptive reconnection. That's necessary. But this is a maladaptive reconnection, so that doesn't actually do anything. Yes?
Why did it only happen in legs and not like somewhere else?
Why does it only happen in what, sorry?
I said, why does it only affect on the legs and not like on arms?
It has to do with the back pressure. So when you're standing, you basically have the weight of all of your venous blood from the rest of your body pushing down on the blood in your legs, which is creating a higher back pressure down here. And your arms, because they're almost level with your heart, there's not a lot of pressure actually pushing the blood backwards away from your heart. And so you don't tend to get too much of that sagging. It does happen, especially in the elderly, but it's not nearly as common as legs. So the legs have a lot of back pressure. So you tend to get this a lot more. Okay, so the reason why we go over these, or at least part of the reason we go over them, it's in the curriculum, but part of the reason we go over them is for this project to give you an idea of some potential illnesses that you can discuss. Because you guys are now going to choose a medical technology to tell me more about. Okay, you're going to do some research into a medical technology. So let me go through the project with you. I realize that I definitely talked longer today than I intended to. I will give you at least all of block 2 tomorrow. And we'll talk about maybe finding some time on Monday as well. Again, I'm not trying to make this difficult for you to complete or anything. Okay, I want to give you a reasonable amount of time to finish in class. So we'll talk about it, but I want to go over the project here first. So hopefully, as we've been discussing these, you've maybe been thinking about the ways to diagnose these things. How do you visualize these illnesses inside of the body? Potentially, how do you treat these illnesses? What devices are used to treat them? We have been discussing that sort of in passing. Where is it here? Medical technology. So you guys are going to create a presentation, and this is just like the other presentation assignments, okay? So you're going to make a presentation, you're going to give your presentation and record it, and you're going to submit the recording of your presentation. And with that, you're also going to submit a research sheet showing me where you've gotten all of your information, okay? So exactly like the other projects, but the content is a little bit different. So the idea here is that you're going to choose a technology that is used to either diagnose or treat a medical condition, and ideally, it is a condition or conditions of the respiratory, circulatory, or digestive system, okay? The idea is we covered those 3 systems, so now you're going to look into a technology that is related to those systems. Yes?
So when you research a technology to detect one illness,
Yep.
you have to describe the illness too.
Yeah, so that's part of it. We're going to get to that in a second. Illnesses, hopefully. Most of these detection techniques are for a broad array of illnesses. And so I would like you to talk about a few of them, ideally. Not in great detail, but the basics of them and how they're detected. So the idea here is that you're going to demonstrate some of your understanding of those systems. That's kind of the point, right? So you're going to incorporate your knowledge of what you learned about the 3 systems as you discuss the technology. So that's part of how I'm going to be assessing it, like you telling me about your understanding of the respiratory, digestive, and circulatory system. And then the other part is telling me a little bit about this device. How was it invented? What's the history of this device? How is it used? Okay, so that's the second component of this. Okay, so you need a title slide. You're going to start off by telling me a little bit about the history of the device. So just to mention again here, this device doesn't have to interact with only one system. So it doesn't have to be just for respiratory system or just for digestive. It can broadly be diagnostic for all of them or whatever. But ideally, when you're talking about the illnesses that it interacts with, what you're diagnosing, I want you to focus on illnesses of one of those 3 systems or 2 of those or whatever, okay? But those systems are the ones that you're going to focus on, the ones we covered. Yes?
So this time on the title slide, you want course code?
Yeah, you should put your course code on the title slide. Yep. Everything that's included on there, right? Course code and your technology and your name. Yes?
Is a CAT scan one?
Yep, CT? Great one. Yep,
Could I do CAT scan?
absolutely you can. Yep, that's a great idea. And by the way, I don't care if there's overlap, guys. I don't care if you're doing the same technology. It really doesn't matter to me. choose whatever you're interested in, okay? I tried to leave this really as broadly open as possible, okay? And if you're having difficulty picking a topic, let me know. I'm happy to go over it with you. Okay, so like I said, the first part here after the title slide is you're going to tell me about the development of the technology. Tell me about its timeline. When was it first invented? When was it first used? Has it changed over time? And when did it change over time? Is it very common to use it now? Is it less common to use the technology now? Like, there's lots you could tell me about the history of the device, okay? Tell me a little bit about how this thing has developed over time. Who invented it? Why was it invented? What was the need that it was first used for, you know? Let me think of a good example of that. Go ahead.
It's not relevant to like the system we did, but an X-ray for the
Absolutely, you can do X-ray.
Skeletal.
Sure.
You never showed us the skeletal system, but
It is not only, X-ray is not only applicable though to the skeletal system. You can use it for diagnosing respiratory illnesses. You can, so it's very broad. And a CT is basically a three-dimensional X-ray. So, and we use CT scans for everything, all kinds of diagnostic purposes. So absolutely, you could do X-ray. X-ray is used to diagnose things of the respiratory, circulatory. You can use X-ray to figure out where blood clots are forming, all kinds of stuff. So, anyway, the second component. So you're telling me about its development. That's the first part. By the way, guys, this doesn't correspond to one single slide, okay? So you don't have to have everything about your technological development on a single slide. If you need 4 slides for that, that's fine, okay? It's however many slides you require. I just need these to be your main headings, okay? I need you to discuss these things. But this isn't indicative of the number of slides you need, so it shouldn't be 1 slide for each. Tell me how it works, okay? Show me a schematic. What does this device actually do, okay? If it's an X-ray, how does an X-ray work? Explain it. What is happening? How does it emit an X-ray? Does it take a photo? Like, what is it doing, okay? So tell me about how your device actually works. If it's for treatment, like explain how it actually treats something. Okay, like what does it do to treat something? I found in my other class that almost everybody focused on a diagnostic device because it's just easier. So that might be a good way for you to go, but you don't have to. Again, you can talk about a device used for treatment as well. That's totally fine. Really, whatever you're interested in. And then the last part here is where you're going to connect it to the curriculum that we've already discussed, the 3 systems. So tell me, what illnesses is it designed to diagnose or treat? Okay, explain that. If there's only a few illnesses, like maybe 1 or 2 illnesses, then talk about those, okay? Tell me what are the causes, the symptoms, and the treatments for those illnesses, okay? And explain how the device is specifically used to diagnose or treat that thing, okay? So that would be the first part. If there's many, for example, you're doing a CT scanner, which can diagnose almost everything, like you can use it for all kinds of things, then pick a few. So pick a few illnesses and tell me about those. 2, 3 would be fine. Yeah. So causes, symptoms, and treatment, tell me about them. How is the machine specifically interacting with those illnesses and being used to detect them, okay? And that's it. Tell me where you got your information at the end. APA citation. Don't forget to complete your research sheet. You do need to have specifically on your research sheet what information you gained from each source. So you want to have your source, and then in point form, what did you get from that source? Source, what did you get from that source? So you need to tell me in your research sheet what you got from each question.
What kind of citation would you like?
APA.
Okay, I always forget because
Oh.
English was one of the
MLA. Yeah, that is fairly common in all the sciences. They usually use APA, and in the arts, almost always MLA. So, and that's it, guys. You can take the rest of the class, which is I think 5 minutes. This is not a great, but we could discuss topics. I don't think you're going to get too much done. If you want to work on a block 3, totally up to you. Tomorrow, I will make sure to give you an entire block, okay? And tomorrow, we're also going to do the dissection in the morning, so tune in for fetal pig action. Anyway, that's it, guys. So I will see you tomorrow. And if you need, again, if you want to discuss topics or if you want to ask if a topic is appropriate or not, just let me know. I'd be happy to go over it with you.